Hey everyone. Tonight we're diving deep into the most mysterious, haunting, and utterly perplexing ancient structures that our world holds. From colossal stones that defy physics, to carvings with impossible precision. From buried cities lost to time to megalithic sites. So bewildering, they've kept archaeologists awake at night. Ancient civilizations left their mark on our planet in ways we still can't fully explain. That means there's a whole legacy of mysteries waiting in plain sight, filled with questions that would make your most confident historical assumptions crumble like ancient dust. So before we journey into these forgotten wonders together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy exploring the unknown with me. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's brave enough to join us on these midnight journeys into humanity's enigmatic past. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a warm blanket, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of our world's most perplexing ancient mysteries. When you think of ancient ruins, you might picture well-documented structures like the pyramids of Giza, the Colosseum, or Machu Picchu. But tonight, we're going somewhere else entirely. We're going to the places where explanations fall short, where engineering principles seem impossible for the time, and where structures exist that conventional history cannot account for. These ancient sites aren't just old buildings, they're three-dimensional puzzles that exist right here on our planet, containing features so precise they look like they were designed with technology that shouldn't have existed thousands of years ago. Picture this. You're standing before a massive stone weighing hundreds of tons, carved with mathematical precision, placed in alignment with stars, with no reasonable explanation for how ancient people moved or shaped it. The stone sits silently, like a challenge to everything we think we know about our past. And across our world, these mysteries are everywhere, silently waiting, silently watching. The ancient world doesn't conform to our neat historical timelines or technological assumptions. It operates by capabilities so bewildering to our modern minds that even our most advanced archaeology struggles to understand them. At these sites, stones weighing as much as 1,200 tons were somehow quarried, moved, and placed with precision that would challenge us even today. And yet, these feats were accomplished thousands of years ago. Prelude: Shadows of a Forgotten World. Before the gleaming skyscrapers, before the Industrial Revolution, before the written word even established itself, something profound was already being constructed across our planet. Colossal stones weighing hundreds, sometimes thousands of tons, were being quarried with uncanny precision. Massive megalithic structures were being erected with mathematical alignments that modern engineers still marvel at. Intricate patterns that correspond with celestial bodies were being mapped into the very landscape of our world. These ancient wonders defy conventional explanation. They challenge our understanding of early human capabilities. They push against the comfortable boundaries of established history. Why do so many of these structures align perfectly with astronomical events? Why have so many been deliberately buried, concealed, or erased from historical records? And perhaps the most disquieting question that emerges when you study these sites closely: who really built them? This isn't merely ancient history being discussed in dusty academic halls. This is potentially a hidden cipher left behind by a forgotten civilization, and remarkably, it seems to be awakening interest once more. If you find yourself captivated by these enigmas, by the questions that linger in ancient stone, then join us on this journey. These next hours will take you around the world, from hidden Japanese monoliths to underwater structures off Greek islands, from megalithic puzzles in the Andean highlands to geometric stone arrangements in Russia's wilderness. Each location we explore raises more questions than answers. Each site challenges what we think we know about human history. Each monument whispers of capabilities, knowledge, and perhaps even civilizations that history has forgotten or chosen to ignore. So prepare yourself for a journey not just across the world, but potentially across paradigms of understanding. The destinations we're about to explore don't fit neatly into conventional historical narratives. They stand as silent challenges to our assumptions about the past. And perhaps, just perhaps, they offer glimpses into a chapter of human existence that conventional archaeology has yet to fully acknowledge or understand. These aren't just curious anomalies scattered randomly across our world. They may be pieces of a much larger puzzle, one that, when assembled, could fundamentally transform our understanding of who we are and where we came from. The giant monolith of Asuka, Japan. In the serene village of Asuka, Japan, nestled among mist-covered hills and verdant rice paddies, rests an enigmatic stone that contradicts everything we understand about ancient Japanese construction. It sits in plain view, undisguised and unprotected, hiding its mystery in the most obvious way possible. Locals pass by it daily without a second glance. Migratory birds occasionally use it as a temporary perch. Curious tourists sometimes pause to photograph it, but almost none comprehend the profound anomaly they're witnessing. The local people call it the Masuda no Iwafune, the rock ship of Masuda. But this isn't a vessel crafted of timber and nails. This is a single, monolithic block of granite, carved with such mathematical precision and geometric perfection that it almost seems manufactured rather than handcrafted. The scale of this stone defies ordinary comprehension, stretching over 11 meters in length and exceeding 8 meters in width. This monolith weighs more than 700 tons. That's not the weight of a large boulder or even a small building. That's the weight class of modern skyscrapers and industrial structures. Yet here it sits, a prehistoric megalith resting peacefully on a gentle hillside in rural Japan. What truly distinguishes this stone as extraordinary isn't merely its imposing size, it's the deliberate, meticulous shaping. The monolith has been carefully carved into a stepped, angular configuration with perfect symmetry. Two rectangular apertures, precisely cut into the upper surface, align with mathematical exactitude. They appear designed as sockets, engineered to hold something, to receive something that no longer exists or was never installed. The craftsmanship reveals another mystery. There are no tool marks. No chisel scars mar its surface. No inscriptions offer clues to its creators. No historical records document its construction. No one can definitively state who carved it. No consensus exists, even on when it was created. Even contemporary Japanese historians cannot agree on its chronology. Some cautiously suggest it's merely 1,000 years old. Others, speaking more quietly, propose it might be vastly more ancient, but no one can explain its purpose or function. The stone presents itself as a component of something larger, not as a completed monument or artistic sculpture. It resembles a mechanical element, one segment of a greater apparatus that either no longer exists or was never completed. Standing beside this monolith creates a peculiar sensation. You're not examining an ancient temple or shrine, but rather a relic of forgotten technology, a machine element rendered in stone. And this is where conventional explanations begin to unravel completely. This village, Asuka, has no historical tradition of megalithic construction. No similar structures exist in the vicinity. The surrounding landscape consists of terraced rice fields, modest Shinto shrines, and traditional family dwellings. The Masuda no Iwafuni simply doesn't belong. It corresponds to no recognized architectural style, no documented religious tradition, no known construction methodology employed in this region of Japan or anywhere else in the country. The techniques necessary to quarry, transport, and precisely shape such an enormous monolith remain unexplained. No historical records document massive cranes in ancient Japan capable of moving 700 tons. No accounts describe vast labor forces dedicated to its creation. No legends speak of gods or supernatural entities lifting such stones into place. There's only silence surrounding its origin. Even the topography compounds the mystery. The Masuda no Iwafune rests on an elevated hillside, not in a quarry site or on level construction ground. It was either carved in place from the existing bedrock or somehow transported to its current position. Both possibilities present significant challenges to conventional archaeological understanding. If carved from the hillside itself, such precision work on granite should have left evidence: deep grooves, chisel marks, hammer impacts, polishing abrasions. Yet when you run your fingers along its edges, the lines feel unnaturally clean and deliberate, as if the stone somehow yielded willingly to its shapers. The two rectangular depressions in the upper surface, approximately 1 meter in depth, appear designed to support vertical elements, perhaps pillars, structural supports, or some form of anchoring mechanism. But the stone offers no straightforward answers, only more perplexing questions. Some researchers speculate it served an astronomical function, perhaps a calendrical device or celestial mapping tool carved into enduring granite. Perhaps the rectangular apertures once aligned with specific celestial bodies, but no conclusive evidence supports this theory. The angles and orientations don't correspond to any obvious astronomical alignments. Others propose it functioned as a tomb. But this hypothesis falters upon closer examination. There's no burial chamber. No evidence of human remains, no funerary offerings, nothing connecting it to mortuary practices. A few even suggest it formed part of an ancient hydraulic system, with the rectangular basins designed to contain or channel water. Yet again, evidence contradicts this. There are no drainage features, no signs of water erosion along potential flow paths. The more extensively you examine this stone, the more it feels as though someone deliberately removed all contextual information. You're examining a single word from a sentence that has been systematically erased from the historical record. What kind of civilization would construct something of this magnitude with such precision? Japan has no documented tradition of working with stones of this scale in ancient times. Even the famous burial mounds, or kofun, employed much smaller stones arranged in earthen formations. Ancient Japan didn't carve monolithic granite blocks like this. Not here, not during any known historical period. Perhaps it wasn't created by ancient Japanese civilization at all. Perhaps it predates what we now identify as Japanese culture. Perhaps it's a remnant from a people whose name, language, and historical record have been completely lost, not destroyed by conquest or natural disaster, but simply erased by the passage of countless centuries. Just down the hillside, modern Nazca continues its daily rhythms. Contemporary roads and buildings now define the landscape. But when you ask local residents about the rock ship, they'll tell you it has always been there. Their grandparents saw it, and their grandparents before them, stretching back through countless generations. No one recalls a time when this silent stone sentinel wasn't watching over their community from its hillside perch. Some whisper ancient legends that it was a vessel constructed for divine beings, that it descended from the heavens, that it was transmuted into stone as punishment for human presumption. But these are merely whispers, old tales, shared around evening fires and during festivals. And even these narratives are gradually fading from collective memory. What endures is the stone itself, unchanging, undecaying, unexplained. And perhaps that's precisely the point. Not every ancient relic is meant to be definitively explained. Some are meant to be discovered and contemplated, not resolved like a simple puzzle, because perhaps we're approaching it from an entirely wrong perspective. What if it's not a monument to human achievement? What if it's not even of terrestrial origin? What if the 700-ton megalith was never intended to be discovered by future generations? You can circumnavigate it, photograph it from every angle, scan it with advanced laser technology, measure every dimension, every groove, and still none of these approaches reveals why it exists, who created it, or what purpose it served. In an era where humans have mapped entire mountain ranges and charted distant galaxies, it's increasingly rare to encounter something that genuinely resists explanation. Yet the Masuda, no Iwafuni, does precisely that. Not because it possesses supernatural qualities, but because it exists as a tangible reality that defies conventional understanding. This isn't a fictional creation or mythological invention. It's not a computerized simulation or theoretical model. It's a massive stone resting on a Japanese hillside at this very moment, and we simply don't understand what it is. We don't comprehend its purpose. We only know with certainty that it shouldn't exist according to our current understanding of ancient technological capabilities. The Yangshan Megalith, the abandoned giant, concealed among the rolling hills near the ancient Chinese city of Nanjing, lies a structure that appears to have been deliberately abandoned mid-creation. A monument not completed, not destroyed by war or natural disaster, but simply halted, as if its creators carved a segment of something far greater and then vanished without explanation. This is the Yangshan Megalith, one of the heaviest stones ever shaped by human hands, or at least, that's our current assumption, because no one can definitively explain how it was carved, who could possibly have moved it, or why they even attempted such a monumental feat. At first glance, it doesn't even register as an artificial structure, just an unusual geological formation protruding from the surrounding landscape. But when you stand beside it, the realization dawns that you're looking at an enormous rectangular block partially extracted from the mountain itself. The dimensions defy conventional understanding of ancient engineering capabilities. The measurements challenge our understanding of what was historically possible. The primary block extends over 16 meters in length, approaches 7 meters in width, and stands approximately 4 meters thick. Its estimated weight exceeds 1,200 tons. That's more than double the weight of the largest blocks used in Egypt's Great Pyramids. And yet, it was unquestionably carved by deliberate human effort, not imagined, not legendary, but physically present, measurable, tangible. You can directly experience it, walk along its base, trace the ridges left by ancient tools with your fingertips, sense the enormity of the undertaking. The megastructure appears to have been intended as a single component of a larger monument. Some researchers believe it was designed to become part of a grand stele, a massive stone tablet carved to commemorate the Yongle Emperor during the early Ming dynasty. But if this interpretation is accurate, something fundamental doesn't align with historical reality, because this stone could never have been transported from its quarry. Not then, not now. Not with any technology available during that historical period. Even with modern cranes, specialized helicopters, or complex multi-phase transportation engineering, moving a 1,200-ton monolith presents nearly insurmountable challenges. The structural stresses on any support mechanism would be immense, potentially catastrophic. The surrounding terrain compounds the difficulty: hilly, forested, unstable, unsuited for moving such an enormous mass. So what motivated this seemingly impossible project? Some theories propose that the workers significantly underestimated the stone's actual weight. Perhaps they began carving, assuming they could extract, transport, and erect it, like other monumental stones of the period. At some point, they must have recognized the impossibility of the task, leading to the project's abandonment, but even this explanation seems insufficient when examined closely. These weren't untrained laborers or amateur craftsmen. These were imperial artisans, master stonemasons, working under the authority of one of China's most powerful emperors. Precision, meticulous planning, and advanced logistics were fundamental to every imperial construction project. This wasn't some isolated village experiment or regional curiosity. This represented a state-level construction initiative with imperial resources and oversight, and yet, they simply abandoned it without completing the work. The cut lines remain remarkably sharp and defined. The grooves in the stone suggest that additional sections were being simultaneously shaped nearby. There's even a second massive stone, also partially separated from the rock face, in close proximity. But none of these components were ever completed, none were successfully moved from their original positions. It's as if the entire project was suddenly interrupted mid-execution and never resumed thereafter. This is where the mystery deepens significantly, because we lack comprehensive documentation. No imperial records detail precisely why the work ceased. No official explanation accounts for this logistical failure. No contemporaneous accounts describe worker casualties or environmental catastrophes. There's only historical silence surrounding the abandonment. Over time, the quarry grew quiet and forgotten. The precise cuts gradually faded beneath accumulating moss and weathering. Eventually, even local discussion of the site diminished and ceased. But if you visit the location today, walking through the surrounding trees, and along the shallow paths worn by curious visitors, you experience something distinctly unusual. Not fear or overwhelming awe, but something more subtle and profound. Time itself seems suspended there. Because this isn't a ruin of something that was once complete. It's a structure that never reached completion. It was intended to rise majestically, and it never did. The central mystery doesn't involve its collapse or destruction. It centers on its inexplicable suspension between conception and completion. One of the more intriguing alternative theories suggests that the workers weren't actually creating a monument at all. Some researchers propose that the stone significantly predates the Ming dynasty, that it was being repurposed or had been rediscovered after centuries of neglect. Perhaps what we observe today represents the second chapter of something that originated long before recorded Chinese history. Could this massive block have been part of an ancient mechanical device, a monumental gateway, or an acoustic resonance chamber? No definitive evidence supports these speculations, but the possibilities remain intriguing, because the act of cutting such an enormous stone presupposes two essential elements: a compelling reason to undertake the effort, and a viable method to complete it. In this particular case, both elements remain elusive and unexplained. The Yongshan megalith isn't merely an exceptionally large stone. It represents a decision frozen in time, a choice someone made to carve to commit substantial resources, and then inexplicably to stop. Something changed dramatically. Something unexpected occurred, and we still lack any satisfactory explanation. In the quiet solitude of that ancient quarry, surrounded by trees and frequently shrouded in mist, the stone waits, not buried, not shattered, just waiting. Not every mystery stems from what has vanished. Sometimes, the most profound questions arise from what inexplicably remains, still immovable, still unexplained, still physically present as a challenge to our understanding. The magnetic ridge of the Ural Basin, far removed from urban centers, buried within the vast expanses of Russia's Ural Mountains, exists a location where conventional instruments malfunction mysteriously, where compasses spin erratically, where metal detectors fall silent, where electronic signals seem to be absorbed by something unseen. The surrounding forest appears unremarkable. The soil shows no obvious anomalies, but something invisible permeates the ground beneath your feet. Locals call it simply the magnetic ridge. No tourist indicators mark its presence, no guided expeditions visit regularly. Just an expanse of land encircled by dense forest. Silent. Cold. Strangely still, the kind of stillness that feels sentient, as if it's actively listening to visitors, not watching, but listening with ancient patience. Hikers and hunters have traversed this region for centuries. Many notice nothing unusual during their passage, but some experience distinctive phenomena. Some report sudden dizziness, others lose their sense of direction, despite clear visibility and obvious landmarks. Dogs sometimes freeze inexplicably, refusing to continue across certain boundaries. Birds appear to modify their flight paths to avoid passing directly overhead, and then there are the stones. Unlike anything else in the surrounding landscape. Scattered across the ridge are stone arrangements that appear deliberately positioned, not randomly distributed boulders or natural formations, but patterns, lines, spirals, angular arrangements that suggest conscious design. Some stones are embedded deep within the earth, almost resembling foundational elements. Others are carefully stacked with apparent precision, though no historical record identifies who positioned them or when this occurred. You can place a magnetic compass directly on one of these stones and observe the needle trembling uncertainly. Sometimes it rotates continuously. Sometimes it seems unable to establish a consistent orientation. Move just a few meters away, and the compass functions normally again. The magnetic readings don't follow any recognized pattern of natural magnetic anomaly. They shift unpredictably. They seem to pulse rhythmically, as if the ridge itself possesses some form of subtle vitality that conventional instruments cannot fully measure or interpret. Scientists who have studied the site have confirmed magnetic irregularities, but no definitive source has been identified through systematic investigation. There's no massive iron deposit beneath the ridge, no buried power cables, no ancient meteorite impact, just stone, and the persistent silence of something that defies simple explanation. Some geologists suggest it might be a naturally occurring magnetic fault line, rare but theoretically possible given the right mineral compositions. Others propose it could be remnants of forgotten technology, a site once used for energy alignment or long-distance communication, something ancient, something subtle, something we no longer comprehend. But no artifacts have ever been officially recovered from the site. No pottery fragments, no tools, no human remains, just the stone arrangements and the unusual energy patterns, and that's precisely what makes it so perplexing. Because this place doesn't feel abandoned or neglected. It feels paused, suspended in time. There's an unsettling orderliness to it, as if someone methodically organized everything before departing. Nothing appears buried intentionally. Nothing seems damaged or ruined. It simply remains unfinished, waiting for something or someone. Local legends claim the ridge is cursed or enchanted. That time flows differently within its boundaries, that people who sleep there experience no dreams or sometimes fail to awaken at the expected time. There are even accounts of temporary disappearances, people vanishing briefly, only to return hours later, or in some cases, never returning at all. Of course, isolated communities often generate fantastical narratives, but every persistent myth typically originates from something tangible and real. And when you stand on the ridge, positioned among the stone patterns, with the wind passing silently across your face and your compass behaving erratically, you inevitably wonder whether these stories represent exaggerations or perhaps echoes of genuine experiences. Some researchers have mapped the arrangement of the stones and identified recurring geometric patterns, alignments that correspond to solar angles or celestial events. Perhaps this was an ancient calendar or stellar mapping system or long-distance transmission site. But for what purpose or for whose benefit? It's tempting to speculate wildly, to invoke ancient frequency manipulation, lost civilizations, or visitors from beyond our world. But the unadorned truth is, we simply don't know. And that uncertainty is what makes this ridge more compelling than any definitive answer, because it creates a void, an empty space, a location where reality itself seems incomplete or unresolved. The magnetic ridge doesn't demand belief or acceptance. It doesn't attempt to impress visitors or convince skeptics. It simply exists. Out in the cold, beneath the ancient trees, where few people think to explore or investigate, and perhaps that's what makes it significant. Not the mystery itself, but the quiet way it persists despite centuries of neglect and disregard. The puzzle stones of Sillustani. High in the Andean highlands of Peru, more than 12,000 feet above sea level, extends a windswept peninsula jutting into the frigid waters of Lake Umayo. There are no gaudy tourist facilities here, no crowded archaeological complexes thronged with visitors, just profound silence, crystalline water, persistent wind, and enigmatic stone structures. But not just ordinary stones. This is Sillustani, a site that initially resembles an ancient cemetery. Stone towers stand distributed across the grassy landscape, like enormous chess pieces, ancient and vigilant. Most archaeological texts identify them as cholpas, funerary towers constructed by the Kala people centuries before the emergence of the Inca Empire. But what they left behind doesn't align neatly with conventional historical narratives, because these aren't merely burial towers. They're sophisticated puzzles, massive circular structures built from stone blocks so precisely cut and fitted that you cannot insert even the thinnest blade between them. No mortar binds them, no cement secures them, just stone, interlocked so seamlessly they appear almost poured into place, as if liquid rock had somehow been instantaneously solidified. It's the caliber of masonry typically associated with the Inca, or perhaps something even more ancient and technically advanced. Some of the cholpas are constructed from rough, irregular stone, clearly repaired or restored in later periods. But others are built from massive, perfectly shaped blocks, each weighing several tons and arranged in a cylindrical pattern that rises vertically with no visible internal support structure. There were no cranes operating at 12,000 feet elevation in ancient Peru, no advanced cutting tools, no diamond-tipped blades for precision stonework. And yet, these towers stand, silent, remarkably preserved, shaped with a precision that suggests mechanical production rather than handcrafting. Archaeologists generally agree that the Kala people used these towers to enter their elite members, and that interpretation may be accurate. But did they actually build them? That's where the historical silence becomes more profound and unsettling, because no one knows the true age of the oldest towers. And the finer the stonework, the less explanation we have for the technical capabilities involved. Some of the blocks curve perfectly around the tower's circumference, with millimeter precision. Others interlock in ways that appear almost digitally designed, as if they were components of ancient software rather than elements of a burial complex. And then there's the enigmatic doorway. Every cholpa features one, a small rectangular opening invariably facing east toward the sunrise. The aperture is remarkably small, too confined for a human body to pass through easily, which raises an intriguing question: were the remains placed inside before the tower was completed? Or was the doorway purely symbolic, never intended for practical use? No conclusive answer exists. Even more perplexing, the towers aren't uniform in design or dimensions. Some are relatively short, others impressively tall. Some are circular, others square or rectangular. Some appear partially collapsed, but the structural failure reveals an even more impressive internal architecture. Hollow chambers, precisely carved niches, blocks that interlock behind the exterior walls like three-dimensional puzzles. They weren't merely stacking stones, they were implementing sophisticated engineering principles. Some researchers believe the cholpas served purposes beyond mortuary functions, that they formed components of a larger integrated system, ritualistic, astronomical, energetic. The tower placements may align with specific constellations or solstice positions. The consistently eastern-facing doorways suggest a solar connection or celestial orientation. But if they were observing the stars, what specific knowledge were they seeking? No inscriptions provide clues, no glyphs offer explanations, just stone and silence. And then there's the subjective experience of the site itself. Visitors to Sillustani frequently describe similar sensations, a perception that something is resonating beneath the ground, not audibly, not as a physical sound, but as a presence, a vibration, as if the stones themselves possess awareness, or are waiting for something specific to occur. The towers occupy a rocky prominence surrounded on three sides by water, strategically positioned, isolated, elevated, above the landscape, almost as if they were deliberately designed to be observed from above, from a significant height, from the sky itself. No conclusive evidence supports this interpretation, of course, but that's what makes this location distinctive. It doesn't need to convince you of anything, it simply exists, calm, massive, silent, and completely unexplained. Historical records indicate that the Inca themselves greatly admired the cholpas and incorporated similar architectural elements into their own construction techniques. That historical detail reveals something significant. The Inca, master stone builders themselves, looked with reverence upon whoever created these structures. We typically assume that historical development follows a linear progression, that tools improved over time, that knowledge accumulated gradually, that more recent civilizations possess superior technology and techniques. But here, on this quiet hillside in Peru, the stone tells a different narrative, because the older the tower, the more sophisticated the workmanship appears. As if someone in the distant past possessed greater knowledge, not less. And perhaps they did, or perhaps they employed techniques we no longer recognize or understand. Perhaps the cholpas were never intended as tombs at all. Perhaps they were transmission devices, or machines, or monuments to a world whose memory has faded completely. And perhaps they were never meant to be discovered by future generations, just silently preserved for their original purpose, whatever that might have been. The carved caves of the Barabar Hills? Deep within the heart of Bihar, India, surrounded by heat, dust, and undulating low hills, rises a rocky ridge containing something that defies conventional explanation. Not enormous, not towering, not deliberately concealed, but quietly extraordinary in its perfection. The Barabar Caves, carved into solid granite over 2,000 years ago, possibly even earlier, aren't famous tourist attractions. Visitors rarely crowd these sites. No elaborate signage announces their presence. Just dark openings in the living rock, surrounded by dry grass and profound stillness. And yet, when you step inside, you immediately sense that something is fundamentally inexplicable, because the interior walls are perfectly smooth, not merely polished, not simply clean, but mirror-like in their perfection, machine flat, as if shaped with laser cutters or diamond-grade grinding equipment. But these caves were created during the Mauryan Empire, when iron chisels remained primitive by modern standards, and the concept of symmetrical acoustics didn't even exist as a recognized discipline. And still, the interior surfaces of these caves aren't just smooth, they generate acoustic phenomena that appear deliberately engineered. The slightest sound, your footstep, your whispered word, reflects perfectly, almost musically, not randomly like natural cave acoustics, but more like the interior of a precisely tuned instrument designed for specific acoustic properties. You clap your hands, and the sound doesn't simply echo, it rings with harmonic overtones. Some researchers describe this as intentional sonic resonance. Others dismiss it as coincidental. But standing within these spaces, experiencing the sound directly, the acoustic properties don't feel accidental. They feel deliberately created for a specific purpose. Most of the caves are relatively small, rectangular or barrel-vaulted chambers with curved ceilings and plain, featureless interiors. But those interiors are unlike anything else from that historical period. No columns, no visible joints, no chisel marks, just polished granite carved directly into solid stone with inexplicable precision. One of the most renowned examples is the Lomas Rishi cave, with its beautifully carved entrance shaped like a horseshoe arch, and an interior chamber with acoustic properties, so unusual they continue to confound modern sound engineers. The ancient historical records indicate these were meditation chambers, gifted to ascetic groups like the Ajivikas, possibly by Emperor Ashoka himself. But that explanation seems inadequate when confronted with the technical achievement these caves represent, because nothing else from the Mauryan Empire approaches this level of technical sophistication. Not temples, not pillars, not royal palaces. These caves represent a significant anomaly in the archaeological record, and that inconsistency raises legitimate questions. If they were designed as meditation spaces, why engineer them to produce such dramatic acoustic effects? Why polish the walls to such an extreme degree that they reflect light like mirrors? Why carve such geometrically perfect forms from granite, one of the hardest stone types on Earth? And why only at this specific location? Nowhere else in India do we find this particular technique, this mirror-like polishing, this acoustic tuning, this austere mathematical precision. It's as if whoever created them had a very specific purpose in mind, completed it exactly as intended, and then disappeared from the historical record. No tools associated with their creation have ever been discovered. No detailed instructions for their design have survived. No evidence explains how the caves were cut or polished to such perfection, just completed spaces waiting silently through the centuries. Some researchers propose that the caves significantly predate Ashoka's era, that they were discovered rather than created during the Mauryan period, and merely repurposed by the later rulers. The inscriptions inside date from that later period, certainly, but they could have been added retrospectively, after the original work was completed. Like inscribing on the casing of a machine, not creating the machine itself, because that's precisely what the Barabar caves resemble. Not simple shelters, but sophisticated devices. You don't enter them merely to rest. You enter to activate something through your presence. Perhaps the acoustic resonance formed part of a specific ritual. Perhaps the sound amplified the human voice for ceremonial purposes. Perhaps the vibration altered consciousness in predictable ways. Or perhaps it served another function altogether, something we no longer know how to measure or identify. Speculation comes easily. Concrete evidence less so, because these aren't grandiose monuments. They're not elaborately decorated or visually imposing. They're simple, almost austere, and yet nothing else feels quite like them acoustically or texturally. If the walls contained inscriptions, we might classify them definitively as temples. If they contained human remains, we'd categorize them as tombs. If they housed machinery, we'd recognize them as technological sites. But they don't. They're simply there, silent, smooth, perfect, empty, like placeholders in the landscape, or like someone created them for someone else's eventual use. And we're only now rediscovering their unique properties. The sonic temples of Malta. On the sun-bleached islands of Malta, surrounded by the deep azure waters of the Mediterranean Sea, stand some of Earth's oldest known stone structures, predating Stonehenge, predating the Egyptian pyramids by centuries. But among these ancient ruins, one site manifests qualities unlike any other. It doesn't soar upward. It doesn't demand immediate attention. It whispers its secrets to those patient enough to listen. Local Maltese call it the Ural Megaliths hypogeum, and once you descend into its depths, the world above seems to vanish completely. This isn't a temple constructed above ground. It's a subterranean complex, meticulously carved deep into solid limestone. A dark, hushed labyrinth of chambers, passageways, and sacred spaces hidden beneath the streets of a modern neighborhood, concealed from casual observation. But it's not the darkness that makes the hypogeum so profoundly mysterious. It's the sound, its acoustic properties that shouldn't exist in a structure of its age. One chamber in particular, the so-called oracle room, possesses a resonance that defies conventional explanation. A male voice, speaking at a low pitch, causes the entire structure to vibrate sympathetically, not just with audible sound, but with physical sensation. You feel it in your skeletal structure, in your skin, as if the chamber itself is responding vocally, and it happens only at approximately 110 Hz, a very specific frequency with unique properties. Modern acoustic engineers have conducted extensive tests within this space. They discovered that sound waves at this precise frequency reflect and amplify in ways that aren't merely unusual. They appear deliberately engineered, with acoustic precision rivaling contemporary recording studios. But this structure was created 5,000 years ago, millennia before the development of electronic amplification, microphones, knowledge of frequency measurement, vibration mapping, or wave physics. And yet the acoustic effect is undeniably real and reproducible. You can stand within that chamber and speak, and your voice transforms into something greater, deeper, more resonant. It fills the entire subterranean complex as if you've been electronically amplified and connected to the earth itself. Researchers hypothesize that this acoustic property may have been utilized for ritual chanting, that the specific resonance might have altered brainwave patterns or induced altered states of consciousness. That sound, rather than visual elements, may have been the primary focus of their spiritual practices and experiences. But there's no written record here. No instructional manuals, no explanatory inscriptions, just stone and the silence between sounds. And that silence raises even more questions, because this wasn't a single chamber. The hypogeum contains 3 distinct levels stacked vertically beneath one another, with carved pillars, side chambers, and winding passages, all meticulously excavated through solid limestone, not a natural cave, not a pre-existing void in the earth. This complex was deliberately created by human hands through solid rock, requiring extraordinary effort and precision, and the deeper you descend within the structure, the stranger the acoustic properties become. On the lowest levels, the air feels perceptibly denser, the sound becomes even more resonant and physically palpable. Some explorers describe the sensation as similar to being underwater, as if the stone itself is absorbing your thoughts and awareness. And then there are the human remains discovered within the complex. Thousands of human skeletal remains were once preserved here, predominantly skulls. Some exhibited signs of unusual cranial elongation, skull shapes that don't correspond to the local population patterns. Others have vanished entirely from the archaeological record, as if removed or relocated elsewhere. Many of the skeletal remains have disappeared from official documentation, transferred to museums, misplaced, forgotten over time. What survives is fragmentary, incomplete, remnants of ritualistic practices, or evidence of a distinct population whose nature remains undefined. The oracle chamber continues to challenge everyone who studies it. Its geometry is asymmetrical. Its ceiling curves organically like a ribcage. There's a small niche in the wall where vocal resonance reaches its maximum intensity. None of these features appear accidental or arbitrary. They can't be coincidental. And the fact that the acoustic effect functions optimally only for male voices within a very specific frequency range, not higher, not lower, only within that narrow band, that's perhaps the most perplexing aspect. It's as if the space was acoustically tuned for a certain type of human speaker, or perhaps something attempting to approximate human vocal patterns. Acoustic archaeologists have attempted to replicate this chamber using modern techniques. They've been unable to reproduce its exact properties. The way sound behaves within the hypogeum differs from any other known stone structure on Earth. It's as if the builders possessed intuitive understanding of how to shape vibration itself within solid stone. Some researchers suggest the chamber was designed not exclusively for the living, but for communication with the deceased. That specific resonant frequencies facilitated transmission of messages between worlds, between dimensions, that it wasn't intended merely to amplify human voices, but to enhance non-physical presence. Other investigators propose even more radical hypotheses. They question whether the hypogeum was ever primarily intended for human use at all. There's no definitive evidence supporting these speculations, of course, but there's a quality to the silence between sounds that seems to respond to human presence. You can sense it in the way your breath lingers in the still air, and how your thoughts seem to slow and deepen, as if the stone itself is listening attentively to your presence. And somehow, deep within your awareness, you sense that what you're hearing isn't merely an echo of your own voice. It's a response from something that has waited patiently for millennia. The hidden grid beneath the Amazon. For centuries, the Amazon rainforest was widely believed to be pristine wilderness, wild, chaotic, fundamentally untamed by human intervention. Early explorers dramatically described it as a green hell. Scientists long maintained that its soil was too nutrient deficient to support advanced civilizations or large-scale agriculture. But then satellite imaging technology began to reveal something extraordinary beneath the dense forest canopy, far below the reach of conventional observation, hidden from explorers and botanists for centuries. A massive hidden grid has been discovered, straight lines extending for kilometers, perfect circles, complex geometric patterns carved into the landscape. Not random natural formations, but clearly designed by intelligent hands. Archaeologists call them geoglyphs, massive earthworks, some exceeding 1,000 feet in diameter, concentrated primarily in Acre and Rondônia, Brazil, and only visible from aerial perspectives. But they're not isolated curiosities. There are hundreds of these structures, and researchers continue to discover more every year as technology improves and more forest areas are surveyed. Lines intersecting at precise 90-degree angles, circles enclosed within squares with mathematical precision, roads that connect apparently empty spaces, ditches that trace complex patterns across vast distances, and no one knows definitively who created them. They're concealed beneath centuries of forest growth, but deforestation has inadvertently revealed their existence, etched into the earth like ancient signatures of a forgotten civilization. Some appear to have served ceremonial functions. Others remain completely enigmatic. What we do know with certainty is this: the builders cleared and shaped the landscape with remarkable mathematical precision. They moved enormous quantities of soil, aligned their designs with solar positions and astronomical features, and in some locations created a mysterious soil type called terra preta, an anthropogenic black earth that remains fertile today, centuries after its creation. This soil isn't a natural formation. It was deliberately engineered through sophisticated understanding of chemistry, microbiology, and sustainable agriculture. And yet conventional historical narratives still teach that the Amazon was never home to complex civilizations, just small, isolated tribal groups, hunter-gatherers with minimal environmental impact. But that conventional narrative is rapidly disintegrating in the face of mounting evidence, because beneath the trees lies a different reality, one inscribed into the earth itself. Some researchers now believe the Amazon may once have supported populations numbering in the millions, living in extensive networks of interconnected villages linked by sophisticated road systems, entire ecosystems carefully managed by ancient knowledge systems, a forest not untouched by human presence, but deliberately designed and cultivated. And if that assessment is accurate, it fundamentally transforms our understanding of pre-Columbian America. It means the Amazon isn't merely wilderness. It's a forgotten urban landscape, one that flourished before European contact, before conquest and colonization, before the rainforest reclaimed the evidence of its existence. And here's perhaps the most intriguing aspect: the grid patterns. Those perfectly straight lines and precisely curved forms aren't merely ceremonial in nature. Some align perfectly with magnetic field lines. Others mirror specific star patterns and constellations. Some follow Fibonacci sequences and incorporate golden ratio proportions, as if the builders were encoding mathematical knowledge into the Earth's surface itself, a message or perhaps a memory preserved in landscape architecture. And yet, we've only uncovered a fraction of what likely exists. Most of the Amazon remains unmapped in terms of archaeological features. Satellite technology can't penetrate the densest portions of the canopy. Ground expeditions remain relatively rare and limited in scope. But when they occur, more geoglyphs invariably appear, raising more questions and highlighting the extent of our historical ignorance. Because the people who created this vast engineered landscape have vanished from history. No names identify them, no texts document their achievements, no monumental temples commemorate their existence, just outlines inscribed in the soil and a remarkably fertile black earth that continues to support agriculture centuries later. These features aren't visually spectacular from ground level. They don't command immediate attention, but once you recognize their existence, you can't unsee the implications. Something vast and organized once flourished here. Something with sophisticated knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and environmental engineering. Something subsequently lost to history, not erased by time's passage, but deliberately buried beneath the regenerating forest. The Baltic Sea Anomaly. In the frigid, dark waters between Sweden and Finland, something inexplicable rests on the ocean floor. It isn't a shipwreck from any known historical period. It isn't a natural geological formation, and according to conventional understanding, it simply shouldn't exist where it does. They call it the Baltic Sea Anomaly, discovered in 2011 by a Swedish diving team searching for sunken cargo vessels. The object initially appeared as an anomalous reading on sonar equipment, a perfect circle approximately 60 meters in diameter, strangely flat on its upper surface, with grooves, ridges, and a peculiar trailing feature extending over 300 meters behind it, resembling a skid mark or impact track, as if it had slid into its current position from above. The initial sonar images were indistinct, lacking fine detail, but even at low resolution, the shape didn't resemble any known natural underwater formation. It resembled a disk, a saucer-shaped object, something distinctly out of place in the Baltic seabed. Initially, many dismissed it as a probable hoax or misidentified natural feature. But it wasn't either. The Ocean X diving team returned to the site for closer investigation. The object proved to be physically real, solid, resting approximately 90 meters below the surface, and it generated unexplained equipment malfunctions. Electronic devices, sonar equipment, satellite phones, and remote cameras all failed simultaneously as the divers approached it, as if the object was still emitting some form of electromagnetic interference. The structure sits at the terminus of an elevated ridge, almost resembling a prepared runway. The surface of the anomaly features numerous right angles, step-like formations, and straight-line cuts that don't occur naturally in underwater geology. Some sections appear artificially polished, while others show evidence of extreme heat exposure or scorching. But this presents a fundamental problem for conventional explanation. Rocks don't naturally form with these characteristics. Geologists express confusion when examining the evidence. Some proposed it might be a basalt formation created through natural processes. Others suggested glacial activity during the last ice age. But these explanations fail to account for the object's symmetrical shape, its precise linear features, and its isolated nature. No other geological features in the region share these distinctive characteristics. It stands alone, an island of mystery in an otherwise unremarkable seabed. The mystery deepened with further investigation. Divers reported a large central aperture in the object, resembling an entrance or passageway. Others documented unusual magnetic readings and detected potentially metallic elements within the structure, though official samples proved inconclusive under analysis. No government or scientific organization has claimed responsibility for the anomaly. No historical record mentions any structure in this specific location, no debris field surrounds it, no contextual clues explain its origin or purpose. And yet, it exists, still submerged, cold, silent, seemingly dormant. Various theories have emerged to explain its presence. Some suggest it might be a crashed, unidentified craft, perhaps an exotic vehicle that came to rest on the seabed thousands of years ago. Others propose it could be an ancient anti-submarine structure from a forgotten conflict or historical period. But the anomaly doesn't correspond to any known design, ancient or modern, terrestrial or theoretical, just fundamentally other in its characteristics. The Ocean X team, confronting repeated equipment failures and limited financial resources, eventually suspended their investigation without reaching definitive conclusions. And so the Baltic Sea Anomaly remains unexamined, unresolved, essentially untouched. Since its discovery, a mystery too profound to dismiss, yet too challenging to fully investigate with current resources. And perhaps that's precisely the point of its existence. Because what lies beneath the Baltic's surface isn't merely an object, it's a fundamental challenge to conventional understanding, a whisper from something potentially older or fundamentally different than we're prepared to acknowledge within our current paradigms. There's no explanatory plaque attached to it, no accompanying narrative, no audible sound from its silent presence, only the immense pressure of deep water and a lingering question suspended in darkness. The monumental heads of Mount Nemrut. High in the mountains of southeastern Turkey, where fierce winds sweep across rocky slopes and clouds roll over rugged terrain, stands a hill that defies initial appearances. From a distance, it resembles a natural peak, just another weathered summit among many in the region. But as you approach, the ground begins to change character. Loose stones give way to deliberate gravel arrangements, and then you encounter them, statues unlike any others, not just ordinary statues. Heads, massive stone heads carved with extraordinary detail, eyes gazing into eternity, intricate beards, regal crowns, majestic wings. They rest separated from their original bodies, scattered across the mountaintop like relics of some forgotten cataclysm. Each head stands taller than an adult human, weighing more than 6 tons individually. The seated bodies, now largely deteriorated, would have originally stood nearly 30 feet tall in their complete form. This is Mount Nemrut, a mountaintop monument that might be a tomb, a sanctuary, or something entirely different. The conventional historical narrative begins in the 1st century BCE, when a local ruler named Antiochus Epiphanes governed the kingdom of Commagene, a small but strategic realm positioned between competing empires. Antiochus purportedly wished to ensure his immortal legacy, so he constructed this monument at the highest accessible point in his kingdom, or at least that's the accepted explanation. Because the deeper you investigate, the more perplexing this site becomes. The heads represent deities from multiple traditions, Zeus, Hercules, Apollo, and others, but their features blend Greek and Persian artistic elements, a deliberate cultural synthesis, as if someone intentionally merged 2 distinct civilizational aesthetics into unified forms. Behind these monumental heads rises a massive artificial mound approximately 50 meters high. It consists entirely of crushed stone and loose rock fragments, meticulously piled with such precision that the structure has maintained its stability for over 2,000 years, despite exposure to extreme mountain weather conditions. There are no visible entrances, no obvious tunnels, no confirmed burial chamber within. Antiochus claimed in inscriptions that his remains would be interred inside, but no archaeological evidence has ever confirmed this assertion. No sarcophagus, no burial chamber, no physical remains have ever been discovered. And this raises a fundamental question: why construct something so enormous and yet provide no access to its interior? Some researchers suggest the mound isn't primarily a tomb at all. that its significance lies not in containing a body, but in concealing something deeper, more profound. The statues originally sat upright, facing the rising sun along precisely calculated lines. The site's layout appears to align with specific celestial events and astronomical positions. The solstices, particular stars, certain constellations seem to have determined the precise arrangement of elements. Was this location primarily a temple, an astronomical observatory, or perhaps a message encoded in stone for future generations? The heads now lie broken and scattered. Their original positioning has been disrupted over centuries. No one knows exactly when or how they fell from their seated positions. Some archaeologists attribute the damage to seismic activity. Others suggest they may have been deliberately toppled during subsequent historical periods. But even in their current fragmented state, they communicate something profound. Each face exhibits distinct characteristics: calm, stern, watchful, and seemingly waiting for something specific to occur. Mount Nemrut is remarkably isolated and difficult to access. It sits at over 2,100 meters elevation, distant from major population centers, removed from ancient trade routes, separated from everything else of significance, and yet someone transported hundreds of tons of stone up this remote mountain, meticulously carved it, precisely arranged it, and deliberately left it exposed to the elements. That level of planning and effort doesn't merely represent ambition. It demonstrates obsession with a specific purpose. What if this site wasn't primarily about religious worship? What if it wasn't even fundamentally concerned with commemorating death or political legacy? What if it was about preserving something specific, ensuring that particular knowledge or information would survive long after surrounding empires had crumbled into dust? Something encoded in stone, in precise astronomical positioning, in deliberate silence that has endured for millennia. The deities represented here don't speak to modern visitors. They don't explain their presence. They simply remain in the cold mountain air, like silent sentinels, like markers indicating something significant, or perhaps as warnings about something long forgotten. The Kaimai Wall of New Zealand. Concealed beneath the moss-covered forest floor of New Zealand's central North Island lies something that fundamentally contradicts the established archaeological record. At first glance, it appears to be just another weathered rock formation, an ancient stone wall partially covered by vegetation and forest debris, forgotten by history and obscured by time. But as you approach and examine it closely, distinctive features become apparent. Straight edges, perfectly flat surfaces, right angles that appear deliberately carved rather than naturally formed. This is what some researchers identify as the Kaimai Wall, and it contradicts everything we understand about New Zealand's pre-European archaeological record. It sits quietly near the boundary of a state forest reserve, close to Lake Taupo, a series of massive stone blocks stacked, aligned, and strikingly uniform in their dimensions. But here's the fundamental mystery. The indigenous Maori people never constructed in stone as a building material. Their traditional structures utilize wood, flax fibers, earth, and other organic materials. Their rich oral traditions and historical narratives describe spiritual beings, intertribal conflicts, and oceanic migrations, but never mention stonework construction of this nature. So who built this wall, and how long has it existed in this location? Some of the individual blocks approach 7 feet in width and appear fitted together with almost mechanical precision. No mortar binds them, no filler material stabilizes them, just pressure, alignment, and perfect balance holding them in place through centuries. Professional geologists have examined the site. Some have concluded it represents merely ignimbrite, a type of volcanic stone that naturally fractures along relatively straight lines, creating an illusion of artificial construction. But this explanation fails to account for the specific characteristics observed. The edges appear too precisely defined, the surface is too uniformly smooth, the layering too deliberately arranged. And some sections of the stone exhibit wear patterns inconsistent with natural weathering, more similar to tool marks or artificial shaping. But here's the central problem confronting researchers. There's no written historical record associated with this site. No carvings decorate its surface. No inscriptions provide dates or context. No chronological markers establish its age. Just the wall itself and the questions it raises by its mere existence. What if these stone formations aren't natural geological features? What if this wall was constructed long before Polynesian voyagers first arrived in New Zealand? Some investigators have proposed it might represent the remnant of an unknown Pacific civilization, that long before the Maori people crossed the ocean to settle these islands, another culture with stoneworking technology inhabited this region, one that worked with megalithic construction techniques, one that subsequently vanished from historical record. Others propose even more radical hypotheses. They suggest the wall could predate major sea level changes, a relic from a time long before the oceans rose to current levels, when distant cultures may have traversed the Earth through now submerged land bridges or maritime routes we no longer recognize. But substantial archaeological investigation remains largely absent. No major research funding has been allocated. No systematic excavations have been conducted. No university-sponsored research projects have thoroughly documented the site, because the wall fundamentally contradicts the accepted historical timeline for human habitation in New Zealand. And in conventional archaeology, anomalies that challenge established chronologies often receive minimal attention or resources. So instead of being properly investigated, the Kaimai wall is frequently dismissed as a natural curiosity, a coincidental geological formation. But even that explanation becomes increasingly tenuous upon close examination, because the stone layers don't resemble random fracture patterns. They fit together with apparent deliberate intention, locked into position as if someone arranged them with specific purpose, and notably, no similar formations exist in the immediate vicinity. Just this one wall, standing alone in the forest, while the surrounding ecosystem gradually reclaims it. Roots steadily encroach across its surface. Lichens and moss progressively obscure its distinctive features, but still, it persists through time. Whether it represents the edge of a forgotten temple complex, the foundation of a much larger structure, or the last visible evidence of an unrecorded civilization, no one can state with certainty. But the academic silence surrounding the wall speaks more eloquently than the wall itself, because the mystery isn't simply about what we observe. It's about what we collectively refuse to acknowledge, a wall that doesn't conform to the established historical narrative, a structure that disrupts conventional chronology, a puzzle piece that doesn't fit neatly into the accepted framework. And perhaps that's precisely why it remains so significant, because the Kaimai wall isn't merely stone. It's a quiet challenge to conventional understanding, a whisper through the trees, suggesting that human history might be far more complex than our current models acknowledge. The Uffington Whitehorse. In the gently rolling hills of southern England, there's a grassy slope where the vegetation parts like a deliberate curtain, and beneath this living veil lies something ancient, something massive, something gazing skyward with unwavering vigilance. Carved deep into the chalky hillside is the figure of a horse, elongated, streamlined, almost abstract in its representation, its body stretched as if captured in mid-gallop, its single eye watchful of the heavens. They call it the Uffington Whitehorse, but this isn't a conventional statue or monument. It isn't constructed from stone or wood or any other building material. It's created through removal, the deliberate excavation of trenches into the hillside, subsequently filled with white chalk, creating lines so massive that the entire figure extends nearly 110 meters from head to tail, only truly visible in its entirety from an aerial perspective. And that represents the first perplexing aspect of this monument, because the people who created it never saw it from the sky. It's not something that can be fully appreciated from ground level. You need significant elevation. You need flight capability to truly comprehend its form and proportions. So why create something so massive yet essentially invisible to its creators? And who undertook this enigmatic project? The Uffington horse has been scientifically dated to approximately 3,000 years ago, predating the Roman occupation of Britain, predating the development of written language in the region, predating almost every other surviving human-made feature in the surrounding landscape. And yet it continues to gleam white against the green hillside after 3 millennia. It has endured only because generation after generation, for thousands of years, someone has returned to maintain it, to remove encroaching vegetation, to deepen the trenches when necessary, to add fresh chalk to maintain its visibility. They never forgot its significance, even when its original meaning became obscured by time. But the mystery extends beyond its remarkable age. It's the distinctive style that provokes the deepest questions. The horse isn't realistically portrayed. It's minimalist, stylized, almost dreamlike in its abstraction. It looks strikingly modern, almost alien in its design aesthetic. Its clean lines and flowing form could easily serve as a contemporary corporate logo or graphic design element, which prompts some researchers to wonder, was this created as an artistic expression, or did it serve some entirely different purpose? Some archaeologists believe it functioned as a tribal emblem, a symbol of power or territorial protection. Others suggest it may have held spiritual significance, that the hill itself was considered sacred ground, and the horse served as a guardian figure, facing the heavens, watching the stars with eternal vigilance. And there's one additional curious feature. The horse faces west, toward the setting sun, toward the general direction of Stonehenge. And beneath it, just downhill, extends a distinctive flat-topped mound known as Dragon Hill, covered with a layer of exposed chalk. Local folklore claims this is where St. George slew the dragon, though that Christian legend was superimposed on a much older narrative. Another tradition suggests it was a site of ancient ceremonial practices. Another interpretation proposes that the Uffington figure isn't actually a horse at all, that it represents a dragon, a celestial serpent, a cosmic entity drawn upon the earth, a being meant to be recognized from above. But again, by whom, given that the creators had no access to aerial perspectives? Some archaeologists have suggested the figure might function as a form of sky marker, a calendrical device, or a navigational aid for travelers, or perhaps an offering to deities etched into the earth so they could observe it from celestial heights. But no definitive evidence supports any single interpretation. No tools for its creation have been recovered. No contemporaneous writing explains its purpose. Just the horse itself. Graceful, enduring, fundamentally inexplicable. Every few decades, community volunteers gather with tools and fresh chalk to clean the lines, to preserve what has already survived for 3,000 years. No formal organization directs them. No financial incentives motivate them. They simply appear when needed, as if the horse still calls to them across time, as if something about this figure must remain visible to the sky. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It isn't surrounded by tourist facilities. It isn't fully understood by modern observers. But it persists on the hillside, facing westward toward the setting sun, as if waiting for something specific to occur, something only it recognizes across the vast expanse of time. The Plain of Jars in Laos. In the misty highlands of northern Laos, there exists a plateau where silence itself seems to have physical presence. The air remains still. The landscape appears unusually quiet, but scattered across the grassy plains stand thousands of massive stone jars. They occupy the landscape in clusters, simultaneously together yet isolated, arranged in apparent patterns like forgotten sentinels, some partially buried, some fractured open, some standing upright, as if still awaiting their intended purpose. They call it the Plain of Jars, and no one can definitively explain why these enigmatic objects exist in this location. The jars are enormous, some exceeding 3 meters in height, weighing several tons individually, carved from solid stone, granite, sandstone, and limestone, not delicately sculpted or ornately decorated, just functional, purposeful in their form. But what specific purpose did they serve? They bear no writing, no identifying markings, no symbolic decorations, just empty apertures facing the sky expectantly. Local legends attribute their creation to giants, a race of ancient beings who purportedly used them to brew rice wine for celebrating a military victory. Others suggest the jars served as burial vessels, containers for the deceased. And in the 1930s, that interpretation gained credibility when a French archaeologist excavated beneath some of the jars and discovered human remains, skeletal fragments, teeth, charcoal residue, glass beads, suggesting some form of cremation ritual. But this explanation remains incomplete because not every jar contained burial evidence, and not every burial site included a jar. No consistent pattern emerged from the archaeological record. Some jars featured lids, others were apparently covered with stone discs, now displaced from their original positions. Many of the jars appear to have been relocated from their initial placement. Some show weather damage or erosion, others bear scars from more recent human conflicts. During the 20th century, this region became one of the most heavily bombed locations on Earth during the Vietnam War era. The Plain of Jars, marked by bomb craters and unexploded ordnance, remained inaccessible to researchers for many years. Even today, sections remain unsafe for thorough archaeological investigation, and that compounds the challenge of understanding these artifacts, because potential answers may lie just beneath the surface, but full excavation remains hazardous. What we can state with reasonable certainty is this: the jars date back approximately 2,000 years. They were created during the Iron Age, potentially between 500 BCE and 500 CE, but no one knows definitively which culture constructed them. The civilization responsible has vanished from historical record. No ruins of their settlements remain. No temples mark their spiritual practices. No texts document their achievements. Just the jars themselves, standing in silent testimony. Some are arranged in expansive open fields, clearly visible from distance. Others remain hidden in forested areas. A few occupy elevated positions on mountain slopes, far from any practical access route. And the stone itself presents additional questions. Some jars were quarried from locations many kilometers from their current placement. Massive stone blocks transported through dense jungle without wheeled vehicles, without draft animals to assist with the labor, just human effort and ingenuity. And that raises the central question: why? Why invest such enormous effort to carve and transport these colossal containers, only to leave them exposed to the elements? Why arrange them in precise rows and groupings? Why leave them apparently empty and unused? And why did the culture that created them disappear from historical knowledge? Was it migration, disease, conflict, or simply the gradual erosion of cultural identity through time? The silence provides no direct answers, no identifying inscriptions, no signature marks, only the wind in the jars, observing, waiting. We still don't know whether they served ritual purposes or fulfilled practical functions that we no longer comprehend. Were they water collection vessels, fermentation containers, astronomical markers, or something fundamentally different from any of these interpretations? Every few years, archaeologists return to the site. They map, photograph, document, but inevitably depart with more questions than answers, and the jars remain ancient, immovable, essentially unchanged. Time hasn't destroyed them. It has only deepened their mystery. Because on the plane of jars, you don't hear the past speaking directly, you feel its presence. It resonates through the stone. It lingers in the morning mist, and it waits for someone to finally remember its significance. The Great Zimbabwe Ruins. In the highlands of southern Africa, surrounded by gently rolling hills and arid grasslands, stands a place constructed entirely from stone. No cement binds it. No mortar holds it together. Just stones, perfectly stacked, precisely balanced, held in position by nothing but time and skilled craftsmanship. This is Great Zimbabwe, a forgotten kingdom, a lost civilization, a profound mystery that fundamentally challenges conventional narratives about Africa's ancient technological achievements. The ruins extend across approximately 800 hectares, but the most iconic section is a massive stone enclosure, circular, imposing, and eerily silent. The walls rise to nearly 11 meters, in some sections, massive, curved, featuring no straight lines, no right angles, no inscriptions, just rhythmic patterns of stone upon stone upon stone, and they have remained standing for over 8 centuries. But here's the truly remarkable aspect. No mortar secures them in place, just precision stonework. Each rock selected with apparent deliberation and placed with meticulous care, tightly fitted, demonstrating that the builders understood principles of weight distribution and structural balance with remarkable intuition. Archaeologists call this dry stone architecture, and Great Zimbabwe isn't merely a single building or monument. It represents an entire urban complex, residential structures, towers, courtyards, passageways, all constructed using the same technique. At its cultural zenith, scholarly estimates suggest approximately 20,000 people inhabited this thriving center of trade and political authority. But this site rarely appears in popular discussions of ancient civilizations, because for generations, no one wanted to acknowledge its African origin. When European colonial explorers first documented Great Zimbabwe in the 19th century, they refused to accept that it could have been built by indigenous African populations. They searched desperately for evidence of foreign builders, Phoenicians, Arabs, Europeans, anyone except the local inhabitants, whose descendants still occupied the region. But no foreign artifacts were discovered, no imported architectural elements, no external cultural influences. Only local knowledge, local stone, and extraordinary indigenous skill. The name Zimbabwe itself derives from Zimbabwe Mabwe in the Shona language, meaning houses of stone. This wasn't a mythological place, it wasn't a legendary location. It was a functional urban center, and yet so much about it remains unexplained. The Great Enclosure, Zimbabwe's most famous architectural feature, contains no windows and only one narrow entrance point. Inside stands a massive conical tower, rising over 9 meters from the ground, solid stone throughout its structure. No one knows its specific purpose. It wasn't a watchtower, as it has no internal access, no stairway, no observation platform. Just a solid conical form, occupying the center of a walled space, like a 3-dimensional symbol, with no accompanying explanation. Some researchers suggest it held symbolic significance, perhaps representing political authority or fertility. Others propose it served ceremonial functions, marking something spiritually significant, but there's no writing to confirm these interpretations. No inscriptions, no explanatory texts. Just silence preserved in stone, and perhaps that's what makes it so powerful and compelling. The people of Great Zimbabwe communicated their knowledge through form, through layout, through architectural design. They controlled regional gold resources. They traded with distant civilizations across vast networks. Archaeological excavations have uncovered Chinese porcelain fragments, Persian glass beads, and coins from across the Indian Ocean trading world. But they built primarily with stone, not merely for practical shelter, but for deeper cultural meaning, and then they departed. No one knows precisely why. Perhaps environmental factors like drought, forced migration. Perhaps trade routes shifted to other regions. Perhaps political power transferred elsewhere, but the walls remain cracked in some places. Weathered by centuries, but still standing in silent testimony. Because Great Zimbabwe wasn't a myth or legend, it was a thriving city, a capital, a civilization too substantial to be erased from history, even when colonial narratives attempted to deny its indigenous African origins. And when you walk through these ruins today, you don't simply hear your own footsteps echoing. You hear questions that persist through centuries. Why no written language? Why no identifying names? Why the mysterious conical tower? Why the deliberate silence? Some mysteries fade with time, but others remain permanently inscribed in stone, waiting for someone to pause, to truly observe, to ask the essential questions. The ancient copper mines of the American Midwest. In the quiet forests along the shores of Lake Superior, something unusual waits beneath the fallen leaves and forest undergrowth. The trees grow tall and undisturbed. The landscape appears ordinary and unremarkable. Yet scattered across Michigan's Upper Peninsula are over 10,000 ancient mining pits, carefully excavated, strangely uniform, and mysteriously empty of their original contents. These are the prehistoric copper mines of North America, and they fundamentally contradict conventional archaeological understanding. What makes them so perplexing isn't merely their quantity or depth, it's the massive scale of what was extracted and apparently removed from the region. Tens of millions of pounds of pure native copper were methodically extracted by hand long before industrial tools existed, long before written records documented the operations, and long before the rise of what archaeologists classify as civilization in North America. Researchers have dated these mines to at least 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. And the people who created them remain unidentified. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't even know where they went after the mining operations apparently ceased. The copper itself was remarkably pure, approaching 99% purity in some deposits. It was extracted using stone hammers and fire-setting techniques. Ancient miners would heat the surrounding rock, then rapidly cool it with water to create fractures, then methodically chip away the material using thousands of heavy stone tools, many of which remain at the sites, worn smooth from extensive use. But this only deepens the fundamental mystery, because the quantity of copper removed is staggering by any standard. Conservative estimates suggest at least 500,000 tons may have been extracted from this region in total, but the copper didn't remain in the area. Only minimal amounts have been discovered in the surrounding archaeological sites. It's as if it simply vanished, traded away, transported elsewhere, or deliberately concealed, and no one knows its ultimate destination. Some theories suggest it was distributed along the Mississippi River through extensive Native American trade networks. Others propose the copper was used locally for tools, ornamental objects, and ceremonial items. But the mathematics doesn't support these explanations. The sheer volume of missing copper far exceeds what archaeological evidence can account for. There are no records, no storage facilities, no distribution centers that explain this massive discrepancy. And then there's the more controversial theory, one that many conventional archaeologists dismiss, but which continues to resurface in the literature: the possibility that the copper left North America entirely, that it crossed the Atlantic Ocean thousands of years ago, that Bronze Age civilizations in Europe and the Mediterranean, such as the Minoans or Egyptians, were somehow importing raw copper from the American continent millennia before Columbus. These are significant claims, based primarily on circumstantial evidence, copper chemical composition analysis, unusual trade artifacts, and ancient seafaring capabilities that we may still underestimate. There's no definitive proof for this hypothesis, but there is undeniably a massive unexplained gap in the archaeological record. Because what we can verify empirically is straightforward: the mines existed as physical realities. The copper was genuinely extracted in enormous quantities. The labor involved was immense and organized, but the historical narrative of who conducted these operations, how they transported the material, and what they ultimately did with it, that story has vanished completely. Lost in the forests, lost through time's passage. No monumental tombs mark their presence. No grand temples celebrate their achievements. No ruler's name preserved in stone. Just thousands of quiet pits and mounds of stone hammers, left precisely where the workers set them down. It almost appears as if the miners simply disappeared once their work was completed. No dramatic collapse of their society, no evidence of warfare or conflict, just an ending without explanation. Today, when you walk through those northern forests, the mining pits aren't immediately obvious to casual observation. They're overgrown, reclaimed by vegetation, moss covering the evidence. But once you recognize the first pit, you begin noticing them everywhere across the landscape. One here, 3 more nearby, dozens concealed under fallen logs and forest debris. You suddenly realize you're standing amid a vast industrial landscape of ancient human endeavor that no longer has a name in historical records. Some researchers believe the mining operations may have continued for thousands of years, a patient, methodical harvest of mineral wealth, generations of workers transmitting knowledge without written instructions, through direct demonstration and oral tradition. But again, where is their legacy in the archaeological record? If these miners formed a distinct culture, where is their artwork, their dwellings, their ceremonial sites? Some archaeologists suggest they may have been nomadic, following seasonal patterns. Others propose their society may have been decimated by disease, absorbed into later tribal groups, or simply migrated elsewhere when the most accessible copper deposits were depleted. But these explanations only lead to further silence and unanswered questions. This represents the central paradox of the Great Lakes copper mystery. It isn't dramatic or sensationalistic, but it's enormous in its implications. It challenges conventional timelines of technological development. It hints at possible trade networks and global connections far earlier than conventional history, acknowledges whether the copper remained within North America or traveled across oceans. It originated in these hills, from these ancient pits, extracted by thousands of unnamed individuals whose identity we may never recover. And the forests continue growing over the evidence, concealing the answers beneath roots and seasons. The giant stone spheres of Costa Rica. Deep within the jungles and banana plantations of Costa Rica lie hundreds of perfectly spherical stone objects, some small enough to roll between your hands, others taller than an adult human and weighing over 15 tons. They don't belong naturally to the forest ecosystem. They didn't form through natural geological processes, and no one knows with certainty why they were created or placed in their locations. They're known locally as Las Bolas, simply meaning the balls, and they've fascinated explorers, archaeologists, and mystery enthusiasts for nearly a century. First discovered in the 1930s during land clearing operations by the United Fruit Company, these spheres appeared unlike anything previously documented in the archaeological record. Scattered across the landscape in apparent patterns, clusters, and lines, some partially buried beneath soil layers, as if deliberately positioned and then concealed. The most remarkable characteristic is their geometric perfection. These aren't roughly shaped stones weathered by natural forces. They are nearly perfect spheres crafted with such precision that even with modern technology, we would struggle to replicate their symmetry without advanced tools. Many are formed from granodiorite, an exceptionally hard igneous rock similar to granite. So how did ancient craftspeople shape them to such exact specifications? What tools could they possibly have employed? How did they achieve such remarkable uniformity across hundreds of examples? Even more puzzling is the complete absence of identifying marks or decorative elements. These spheres bear no symbols, no carvings, no dates or maker's marks. There is no written historical record identifying their creators. The indigenous peoples of contemporary Costa Rica don't claim them as part of their cultural heritage. They maintain that these stone artifacts were already ancient when their ancestors first incorporated them into oral traditions. Over 300 spheres have been documented thus far. Some stand in isolation, but others were apparently arranged in straight lines, triangular patterns, or more complex geometric configurations. Some researchers have identified astronomical alignments, suggesting they may have marked solar positions, solstices, or equinoxes. Some archaeologists propose they functioned as astronomical tools, forming a kind of three-dimensional calendar inscribed into the landscape. But without accompanying written records, these interpretations remain speculative. Archaeologists have dated associated artifacts to approximately 600 CE to 1500 CE, suggesting the spheres could be up to 1,400 years old. But some researchers believe they may be significantly older, possibly representing prehistoric artifacts from a culture that left no other traces except these enigmatic stone spheres. In recent decades, many spheres have been relocated from their original positions, moved to town plazas, museums, or private gardens for display purposes. Others have been damaged, split open by treasure hunters, or stolen, and with their displacement, contextual information has been irretrievably lost. Without their original positioning, we lose critical data about potential patterns, alignments, and ultimate purpose. Some local Costa Rican legends attribute magical properties to the stones, suggesting they contain gold at their centers, or that they were created by supernatural beings. Other narratives propose they were used in religious ceremonies, or that each sphere marked the grave of a chieftain or warrior, but no human remains have been consistently found beneath them. No cremation evidence, no definitive explanation. And yet, they persist through time, quietly challenging our assumptions about what ancient peoples could accomplish technologically. Because whoever created these spheres wasn't merely crafting utilitarian tools for survival. This wasn't merely practical technology. This represented intention, artistic expression, mathematical understanding, or perhaps astronomical knowledge encoded in stone. Some interpretations extend beyond conventional archaeology. There are those who suggest the spheres represent evidence of a lost civilization, a culture with sophisticated knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and stoneworking techniques that disappeared before recorded history documented their achievements. Others propose even more exotic explanations, citing the precision of their shaping and the mystery of their distribution patterns as potentially indicating non-human origins. But the truth is likely more prosaic, yet still remarkable, a testimony to human ingenuity and purpose. Because creating hundreds of massive stone spheres from solid rock, shaping them with mathematical precision, transporting them through challenging jungle terrain, and positioning them in specific alignment with celestial bodies, requires organization, knowledge, and clear intention. And for a culture that apparently left no writing, no extensive architectural complexes, no monumental temples, this may have been their enduring message, their story told through perfect geometric forms. Today, the Costa Rican government protects many of the remaining spheres as cultural heritage sites, but fundamental questions persist. How many more remain undiscovered beneath the jungle vegetation? What patterns might emerge if we could map their original complete distribution? What if we're observing only fragments of a larger, more complex design whose full extent remains hidden? And perhaps that's the essential point. The spheres don't demand attention through elaborate decoration. They don't insist on immediate interpretation. They simply exist in quiet perfection, witnessing the passage of centuries, waiting not necessarily to be explained, but simply to be acknowledged. The Marcafiosi Stone Forest, Peru. High in the Andes Mountains of Peru, nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, extends a plateau unlike any other geological formation on Earth. It's located relatively close to the bustling metropolis of Lima, but it exists in what feels like an entirely separate reality. Here, constant winds sweep across vast expanses of stone formations. Clouds drift close enough to touch. The silence possesses an almost tangible quality, as if it's observing your presence. This is Marcawasi, a location unfamiliar to most people, but unforgettable to anyone who has experienced it directly. What makes Marcawasi so profoundly unusual isn't merely its remote location, it's the stone formations that emerge from the landscape. Massive rock structures that appear almost sculpted, resembling faces, animals, thrones, doorways, temples, all seemingly emerging naturally from the native rock, yet too precise, too intentional to be dismissed as mere coincidental weathering. There's a formation that resembles a human profile gazing toward the horizon. Another evokes a crouching lion in perfect stillness. One resembles a giant throne carved into a cliffside, geometrically squared and leveled. Some stones form what appears to be a portal or gateway, two vertical pillars supporting a horizontal lintel, like the frame of an ancient entrance to somewhere unknown. But conventional geology maintains that no one deliberately carved these forms, at least according to mainstream archaeological interpretation. Geologists argue these are natural formations created through differential erosion, wind, and water action over millennia. And in many locations worldwide, similar claims would be entirely reasonable. But Marcawasi presents something different. The sheer concentration of recognizable forms, their specific placement, their orientation towards celestial features, suggests something beyond random erosion patterns. Some researchers believe Marcawasi preserves evidence of an unknown prehistoric culture, a civilization that may have utilized the plateau as a ceremonial center, or something with even greater significance. The entire area feels deliberately designed for some specific purpose. Some formations appear to indicate astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, alignments with particular star systems. And then there are the unusual subjective experiences reported by visitors. Travelers frequently describe hearing voices carried on the wind when no one else is present. Some claim the site possesses a distinctive energy, unusual electrical phenomena, spatial disorientation, even temporal anomalies, where time seems to flow differently. Others speak of a lost city concealed beneath the plateau itself, a complex that may still exist, buried beneath accumulated rock and sediment over centuries or millennia. One persistent legend identifies the place as the City of the Gods, where beings descended from the sky and transformed stone into messages for future generations. Local indigenous traditions maintain that ancestral spirits continue to guard the site. Others describe luminous phenomena, light orbs observed moving between the rock formations at night, without obvious explanation or pattern. Marcawasi wasn't formally documented by Western researchers until the mid-25th century, when a Peruvian physician, Daniel Russo, conducted detailed studies of the site. He believed these formations weren't accidental or coincidental. They represented deliberate artistic and symbolic expressions. He proposed that the plateau functioned as a form of stone library intended to preserve knowledge, not through written language, but through sculptural representation. He suggested it might contain encoded information about an ancient global catastrophe that decimated human populations in the distant past. The challenge for researchers is that there's no conventional archaeological evidence at the site. No writing, no tools, no skeletal remains, no architectural ruins, just the enigmatic rock formations themselves. Skeptics attribute the recognition of figures and forms to pareidolia, the psychological tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli. But even this explanation doesn't adequately address the unusual concentration of recognizable forms in a relatively confined geographical area. The sheer number of clearly identifiable figures clustered together on a single elevated plateau far above the surrounding landscape. It's as if the mountain itself was deliberately shaped to communicate something specific. There's another curious aspect to consider. Some of the recognizable forms don't represent indigenous South American fauna or mythology. There are shapes resembling elephants, lions, even a sphinx-like formation, none of which are native to the American continent. Could these potentially represent evidence of contact between ancient cultures across oceanic barriers, or perhaps preserved memories in stone from a time before continental separation? Conventional historians dismiss such interpretations as speculative. The site remains understudied by mainstream archaeology, generally classified as an interesting geological curiosity rather than a significant cultural landscape. Few extensive excavations have been conducted. Few researchers return for comprehensive investigation. It's almost as if the mountain actively resists revealing its secrets, or perhaps it's protecting them from misinterpretation. Markawasi occupies the boundary between conventional geology and intentional geometry, between random natural processes and deliberate landscape modification. There are no explanatory signs, no protective barriers, just exposed stone, persistent wind, and an inescapable sense that something significant awaits discovery. Because this location doesn't announce itself dramatically, it communicates through subtle suggestion. And if you sit quietly in the mist, simply observing as the distinctive shapes appear and disappear through shifting fog and changing light, you begin to wonder, perhaps these rocks weren't shaped purely by chance and natural weathering. Perhaps they were shaped by memory and intention. The sunken city of Pavlopetri, Greece. Just off the southern coast of Greece, where the azure waters of the Aegean Sea gently lap against the shoreline, something ancient and unexplained rests beneath the waves. The water appears deceptively shallow here, clear, calm, seemingly unremarkable. But if you descend just a few meters below the surface, the ocean floor suddenly transforms. It becomes organized, structured, clearly artificial. Stone foundations, courtyards, roads, rooms, walls. Not random natural formations, but the unmistakable remnants of human habitation and urban planning. This is Pavlopetri, the oldest known completely submerged city on Earth. It wasn't discovered by treasure hunters or underwater explorers, but almost accidentally through scientific research. In 1967, a team of oceanographers and archaeologists noticed unusual rectangular patterns beneath the surface. When they systematically mapped the site, what they documented astonished the archaeological community, a complete urban layout approximately 4,000 years old. But even that estimate may be conservative. Some researchers suggest portions of the site could be significantly older, potentially dating back over 5,000 years to the early Bronze Age. The city lies in relatively shallow water, only about 3–4 meters deep in most sections. There's no need for specialized deep diving equipment or pressurized submersibles, just basic snorkeling gear provides direct visual access to an ancient world, a city with organized streets, multi-room dwellings, sophisticated drainage systems, a central public square, even what appears to be a designated cemetery area. It's not scattered ruins, requiring speculative reconstruction. It's not theoretical extrapolation from fragmentary evidence. It's a substantially intact city preserved beneath the sea. And this discovery fundamentally changes our understanding of ancient urban development, because for decades, conventional historical narratives maintained that organized urban planning didn't emerge in Europe until the classical Greek period, approximately 2,500 years ago. But Pavlopetri demonstrates that people were constructing complex cities with sophisticated civic planning, social organization, and architectural sophistication thousands of years earlier than previously acknowledged. And yet, no one knows its original name. There are no surviving texts that mention it, no legends passed down through generations, no myths connecting it to any known kingdom or civilization. The stones remain silent, and the sea protects them from further disturbance. Whatever this city was called, whoever inhabited it, and why they ultimately departed, these fundamental questions remain unanswered. One of the most remarkable aspects of Pavlopetri is its exceptional state of preservation. Most ancient cities deteriorate into unrecognizable piles of stone and sediment over centuries, but here, the sea has functioned as a time capsule. The gentle currents and sandy seafloor have preserved the urban layout with remarkable integrity. Archaeologists have digitally mapped entire city blocks, kitchens, corridors, interior courtyards, still clearly visible, just as they existed thousands of years ago. But the mystery deepens when we consider why it's underwater at all. Some researchers proposed that a major seismic event affected the region around 1000 BCE, causing the land to subside into the sea. Others suggest a series of tsunamis gradually inundated the city beneath the waves. Whatever specific cataclysm occurred, it wasn't a gradual process allowing for adaptation. It was catastrophic and sudden. The inhabitants didn't rebuild elsewhere. They were either lost in the disaster or forced to abandon their home permanently, and then the sea claimed it completely. Today, only a small community of specialized researchers regularly visit the underwater ruins. Tourist activity remains minimal. There's no monumental museum constructed above it, no elaborate infrastructure supporting visitation, just seaweed gently moving against ancient foundations, and fish swimming through rooms where once children played and community members gathered, a thriving neighborhood, frozen in time and preserved in the blue depths. But here's where the mystery becomes even more fascinating. Some researchers believe Pavlo-Petri wasn't merely a city. It may have functioned as a trading hub connecting ancient Minoan, Mycenaean, and potentially even Egyptian cultures. Artifacts discovered nearby suggest the movement of goods, ceramics, dyes, metals between distant lands across established maritime routes. If this interpretation is accurate, Pavlo-Petri might have participated in a sophisticated international trade network centuries before conventional written history documented such extensive commercial interactions. But all of this remains informed speculation, because the sea holds its secrets closely. No names of rulers or residents, no records of wars or political alliances carved into stone, no dynastic histories preserved in durable materials. Just the eerie stillness of empty streets paved thousands of years ago. And perhaps that's what makes it so compelling for researchers and the imagination alike. Unlike cities that were conquered, burned, rebuilt, and modified over centuries, Pavlo-Petri simply sank beneath the waves in a single event. No one desecrated it. No one intentionally erased its identity. It slipped quietly beneath the surface and waited for thousands of years to be rediscovered by modern observers. It's not Atlantis of legend. It's a documented archaeological site, mapped and studied using scientific methods. But it still resists complete understanding or explanation, and when you float above it, sunlight filtering through the water to illuminate stone walls erected 5 millennia ago, you can almost sense the final moments before catastrophe struck, the sudden silence before the sea rushed in, the weight of an ending that no one anticipated, a city not lost to the passage of time, but preserved by it in three-dimensional form. The Ural Megaliths of Russia. Far removed from the ancient Mediterranean civilizations and the desert monuments of Egypt, deep within the rugged wilderness of central Russia stand the Ural Mountains, massive, cold, and largely silent to historical inquiry. These mountains are ancient not merely in geological terms, but in their place within mythology and cultural memory. In local Russian traditions, they're regarded as the spine of the earth, a natural boundary dividing Europe from Asia, but concealed within these mountains, largely untouched by tourism or systematic archaeological investigation, are strange stone structures that few people outside Russia even know exist. They aren't castles or fortresses, they aren't conventional temples or shrines, and they certainly aren't modern constructions. These are the Ural Megaliths, enormous blocks of stone, stacked and shaped in ways that appear to defy conventional historical understanding and technological explanation. One of the most famous examples is located near the town of Snezhinsk, in a densely forested area where modern development never penetrated. There stands a stone wall extending hundreds of meters, constructed from rectangular blocks, stacked with near-mechanical precision. Some individual stones weigh more than 3,000 tons, heavier than anything moved during the construction of Lebanon's Baalbek complex, widely considered one of the most massive stoneworking achievements of the ancient world. And yet here they rest, in quiet alignment, deep within the Russian wilderness, essentially unrecognized by mainstream historical narratives. The sheer scale of these blocks is enough to give even casual observers pause for reflection. They aren't naturally layered sedimentary formations. They aren't the result of random fracturing. These don't represent coincidental patterns in the landscape. They appear deliberately placed, intentionally engineered, specifically arranged, and yet no historical records explain their existence. No tools have been discovered nearby. No cultural artifacts provide context. No inscriptions offer clues to their creators. No legends name their builders. Just the stones themselves and the profound silence surrounding them. Local hikers and independent researchers have documented these formations for years without mainstream archaeological attention. They describe corridor-like spaces between the massive stones, pathways that wind between the blocks, resembling the remnants of ancient streets or processional ways. Some stones exhibit clean, sharp angles, as if cut with precision tools rather than crude implements. Others are so perfectly squared that they resemble modern concrete structures, except they're formed from solid granite, one of the hardest natural stones on Earth, highly resistant to shaping with primitive tools. But who could have constructed this, and during what historical period? Conventional geologists argue that these formations resulted from natural processes, erosion, and frost wedging, creating the illusion of artificial construction. But this explanation becomes increasingly tenuous when examining the evidence closely. In some areas, blocks are stacked directly on top of each other, perfectly balanced with no signs of random tumbling or natural displacement. Some even rest on smaller stone supports, like intentionally created platforms or foundation elements. There's no known historical culture in this region capable of working stone at this massive scale, and certainly not in a location this remote and climatically challenging. There are no nearby ruins of settlements, no pottery fragments, no human remains. Whatever civilization created these structures apparently didn't permanently inhabit this area, or perhaps didn't remain there after completing their work. Some Russian researchers propose the site may predate the last ice age, potentially over 12,000 years old. That would place it in the same controversial category as Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Gunung Padang in Indonesia, and other sites that challenge conventional timelines of early human civilization. Because if humans were indeed working with multi-ton stone blocks during that remote period, everything we currently understand about prehistoric technological development requires fundamental revision. The Ural Mountains themselves occupy a significant place in ancient mythology. In traditional Russian cosmology, they were considered sacred landscape features. Some legends suggest they contain the ruins of a forgotten race, giants, gods, or survivors from a pre-flood world. Others maintain the region served as a refuge during global catastrophe, a place where knowledge and architectural techniques were preserved when other regions experienced devastation. But none of these narratives can be conclusively proven through conventional archaeological methods, only sensed as possibilities. Adding to the mystery are local accounts of unusual phenomena, lights observed moving between the stones at night, whispered voices heard in absolutely still air, strange compass disturbances in specific locations around the formations. Researchers have documented minor magnetic anomalies near some of the structures, though no equipment failure has been systematically reported, just subjective sensations of unease or disorientation. And like many potential archaeological sites challenging conventional historical narratives, the Ural Megaliths suffer from institutional neglect. They aren't protected as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. They receive no government conservation funding. Most haven't even been comprehensively mapped using modern technology. A few drone surveys have documented them from above, but systematic excavation has never been undertaken. It's almost as if the mystery is being allowed to deteriorate naturally, or to protect itself without intervention, which leaves us with only what can be directly observed: inexplicable arrangements of massive stone blocks, impossibly heavy yet balanced in apparent symmetry, a wall that leads to no identifiable destination, yet remains standing through centuries of exposure to harsh climate. All of it hidden deep within a forest, where few people venture deliberately, as if the past inscribed a message and concealed it beneath trees, hoping someone in the distant future would possess sufficient curiosity to discover it. We don't know who built the Ural Megaliths. We don't understand their purpose or function, but we can recognize they aren't merely natural rock formations. They're too massive, too precisely arranged, too intentionally positioned to be dismissed as geological coincidence. And sometimes, when you encounter something that fundamentally contradicts established understanding, you're not meant to immediately explain it away. You're meant to remember it, to consider its implications, because not all ancient structures deteriorate completely. Some endure through millennia, waiting silently in remote forests, stones stacked upon stones, bearing the weight of questions that conventional history has attempted to erase or ignore. The Yonaguni Monument underwater. Just off the southern coast of Japan, in the clear waters surrounding Yonaguni Island, divers seeking hammerhead sharks encountered something entirely unexpected. What began as a routine diving expedition, peaceful underwater exploration, excellent visibility, abundant marine life, suddenly transformed when they observed something that shouldn't exist according to conventional understanding. Not coral formations, not natural rock outcroppings, not a shipwreck, but what appeared to be a staircase, underwater, carved into solid stone and extending far beyond initial visibility. A massive multi-level structure, with right angles, flat terraces, vertical walls, step-like formations resembling the foundation of a submerged pyramid, perfectly straight edges extending across the seafloor. No one anticipated this discovery. This occurred in 1986, and to this day, no consensus has emerged regarding what it actually represents. They call it the Yonaguni Monument, a sprawling stone formation resting approximately 30 meters beneath the ocean surface, measuring roughly 150 meters in length and over 40 meters in width. Some researchers suggest it resembles a temple complex. Others propose a defensive fortification, and some maintain it shouldn't exist at all, as an artificial structure. Because if it was indeed created by human hands, then it was constructed before the last ice age concluded, when this entire area remained dry land, which would place its origin at least 10,000 years ago, possibly significantly earlier. And that fundamentally contradicts conventional archaeological understanding. Mainstream archaeology maintains that no advanced stoneworking culture existed in prehistoric Japan during that period. No temples, no urban centers, just small, scattered hunter-gatherer groups with minimal technological development. But the Yonaguni Formation tells a different story through its physical characteristics. Divers describe extensive features including wide stone platforms, trench-like channels, and even a stone column standing vertically like a pillar or support structure. Some report what appears to be a staircase ascending toward what might once have been the surface before sea levels rose dramatically. And in one section, what might be carvings. Some investigators claim to have identified faint symbols, possibly pictographs, etched into the rock. Others report observing a formation shaped like a human face, now eroded by centuries of ocean currents. Critics argue it's entirely natural in origin. They maintain that tectonic activity and the specific properties of sandstone create these types of angular shapes. They suggest the ocean waves carved the apparent steps, that the monument represents an illusion created by natural processes. But if that interpretation is correct, why do so many of the features follow apparent architectural logic? Why are some step formations uniform in height? Why do the angles maintain consistency? Why do some corridor-like features lead to apparent chambers, but terminate abruptly, like abandoned passageways? And perhaps most perplexing, why has it never been thoroughly investigated by mainstream archaeology? The Japanese government hasn't designated it as a protected cultural site. No major excavation or comprehensive documentation project has been undertaken. The site remains largely unstudied, as if someone or something prefers it forgotten or dismissed as a natural curiosity. Some theorists propose it represents the remnant of a lost Pacific civilization, something analogous to the Atlantis legend, but specific to the Eastern Hemisphere. Others suggest it might have been a ceremonial site, a ritual space submerged by rising sea levels following the last ice age. And then there are those who believe Yonaguni isn't merely a ruin, but a warning from the distant past. That long before our written historical record began, there were people with sophisticated knowledge of stoneworking, of architecture, of astronomy, who built high above sea level and then vanished as waters rose and inundated their achievements. Their monuments submerged not by warfare or deliberate destruction, but by gradual geological and climatic changes beyond human control. And perhaps, just perhaps, the ocean conceals far more than we currently recognize. Not because it intentionally hides evidence, but because we've stopped looking systematically for underwater ruins, assuming we've already discovered everything significant. The ocean currents brush gently against the Yonaguni Monument every day, flowing through its corridors, gradually eroding its edges, slowly integrating it deeper into the submarine landscape. But it remains there, waiting beneath the waves, whether it was a temple or a tomb or something entirely different from either. It stands as a reminder that some mysteries aren't truly lost to time and knowledge. They're simply resting in places we haven't thought to explore thoroughly with open minds. Epilogue: Echoes of a Forgotten World. As we conclude our journey across continents and beneath oceans, exploring structures that defy conventional explanation, a pattern begins to emerge through the silence. These aren't merely curious anomalies scattered randomly across our world. They form a constellation of questions pointing towards something more profound, a chapter of human experience that mainstream archaeology has yet to fully acknowledge or integrate into its narrative. From the precisely carved granite monolith in Asuka, Japan, to the underwater structure off Yonaguni Island. From the mathematical precision of Costa Rica's stone spheres to the impossible acoustics of Malta's hypogeum, from the magnetic anomalies of Russia's Ural Mountains to the unexplained grid patterns beneath the Amazon rainforest. These sites don't speak the language of conventional history. They whisper of capabilities, knowledge, and perhaps civilizations that existed long before our textbooks begin their chronologies. They suggest a world where massive stones were moved with apparent ease, where mathematical and astronomical knowledge informed construction, where precision stonework was achieved without modern tools. What if our understanding of human history remains fundamentally incomplete? What if civilization has risen and fallen in cycles far longer and more complex than we currently recognize? What if catastrophic events periodically reset human progress, leaving only the most durable monuments as testament to what came before? These aren't merely speculative questions. They emerge directly from the physical evidence, from stones too massive to move with known ancient technology, from precision that shouldn't have been possible with primitive tools, from astronomical alignments that reveal sophisticated mathematical understanding, from structures and locations that should have been inaccessible to ancient peoples. Perhaps most telling is the institutional silence surrounding these sites. While tourist crowds flock to the Egyptian pyramids and Machu Picchu, these equally remarkable locations remain understudied, underfunded, often deliberately ignored by mainstream archaeology. It's as if acknowledging their significance would require rewriting established historical narratives that academic careers and reputations depend upon. But the stones themselves don't require academic validation. They continue standing in silent testimony, challenging us to expand our understanding, to question our assumptions about what was possible in remote antiquity. They invite us to consider that perhaps our ancestors were more sophisticated, more knowledgeable, more connected across vast distances than conventional history has acknowledged. This isn't about aliens or supernatural forces. It's about recognizing human ingenuity and achievement across a potentially much longer timeline of advanced civilization. It's about acknowledging that catastrophic events may have repeatedly interrupted human progress, forcing survivors to rebuild from fragmented knowledge. The next time you encounter a mainstream historical timeline that neatly compartmentalizes human achievement into convenient epochs, remember the Masuda no Iwafune sitting inexplicably on its Japanese hillside. Remember the acoustic perfection of India's Barabar caves. Remember the mathematical precision of Costa Rica's stone spheres. These silent witnesses tell a different story, one of sophisticated knowledge emerging far earlier than conventionally acknowledged, of capabilities that don't fit neatly into our progressive model of technological development, of connections between distant cultures that challenge our understanding of ancient isolation. As we reflect on these enigmatic sites scattered across our world, perhaps the most important question isn't who built them or even how they were constructed. Perhaps the most profound question is why we've collectively chosen to ignore or minimize their significance. What does it say about our modern civilization that we've relegated these inexplicable achievements to footnotes and fringe theories rather than placing them at the center of our inquiry into human origins? The stone speaks if we're willing to listen, not with words, but with presence, with precision, with mathematical relationships, encoded in physical form. These aren't primitive attempts at greatness. They represent sophisticated understanding, translated into the most durable medium available, stone that has outlasted the civilizations that shaped it. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, I invite you to consider a different narrative of human history, one where advanced knowledge has risen and fallen repeatedly across a much vaster timeline than our textbooks acknowledge. One where global connections existed long before our historical records began. One where our ancestors achieved what we still struggle to explain with our modern understanding of physics and engineering. The mystery isn't just in the stones. It's in our collective reluctance to see them for what they truly represent. Chapters from a much longer, much more complex human story than we've been willing to acknowledge. A story that continues to wait patiently in stone for those curious enough to truly see what stands before them. The Antikythera Mechanism, Ancient Computer. In the year 1901, divers exploring a shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera made a discovery that would challenge everything we thought we knew about ancient technology. Among the expected cargo of statues, pottery, and coins, they recovered a corroded, calcified lump that initially attracted little attention. It wasn't until decades later, when modern imaging technology finally revealed what was hidden inside, that the archaeological world was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The object, now known as the Antikythera Mechanism, wasn't just another artifact. It was a sophisticated astronomical computer, created approximately 2,000 years ago, a mechanical device so advanced that nothing of comparable complexity would appear again in the historical record for at least another 1,000 years. This wasn't primitive technology. This was precision engineering from a time when we thought humans were still using simple tools and basic instruments. This was a device with at least 30 precisely crafted bronze gears arranged in a differential system that could track the movements of the sun, moon, and planets with remarkable accuracy. But the mystery doesn't end with its sophisticated design. The mechanism also featured inscriptions, a kind of instruction manual etched into the metal itself, explaining how to use this advanced celestial calculator. It could predict eclipses, track the lunar phases, and even account for the irregular orbit of the moon, with a special gear system that precisely matched what we now know to be the moon's elliptical path. The craftsmanship required to create such precisely calibrated gears, some with teeth less than 2 mm in size, cut to exact specifications, suggests a level of technological sophistication that simply shouldn't have existed in the ancient world, according to conventional historical narratives. There were no magnifying glasses, no precision measuring tools, no standardized units of measurement that could explain this level of accuracy. And here's where the mystery deepens further. The Antikythera Mechanism doesn't appear to be an experimental prototype or a one-off creation. The confidence of its design, the sophistication of its components, the instructional text, all suggest this was likely one example of an established technology, perhaps even mass-produced by craftsmen who thoroughly understood the astronomical and mathematical principles involved. But if that's true, where are the others? Why haven't we found more examples? And most importantly, why did this technology apparently vanish completely from the historical record, not to reappear for over a millennium? It's as if someone simply erased this chapter from human technological development. Some researchers suggest the knowledge may have been deliberately suppressed or lost during societal collapse. Others propose that similar devices might have been melted down for their valuable metal during times of war or economic hardship. But these explanations feel incomplete when confronted with the sheer sophistication of what we've discovered. What the Antikythera Mechanism tells us is that our linear narrative of technological progress, the comfortable story that human innovation has followed a steady upward trajectory, is fundamentally flawed. Knowledge has been lost. Technologies have disappeared. Entire systems of understanding have vanished, only to be rediscovered centuries later. And perhaps that's the most unsettling aspect of this ancient computer. It doesn't just challenge our understanding of what the ancient Greeks were capable of achieving. It challenges our entire conception of human history as a story of steady progress. It suggests cycles of advancement and loss, of knowledge gained and then forgotten, of civilizations that reached heights we're only now beginning to comprehend. The next time someone speaks with certainty about what was or wasn't possible in the ancient world, remember this corroded mechanism pulled from the Mediterranean Sea. Remember that it existed when it shouldn't have been possible. Remember that it functioned with a precision that defies conventional explanation. And remember that it sat unrecognized for decades because it simply didn't fit what we thought we knew about human capability. Some mysteries aren't mysterious because they're hidden. They're mysterious because they're sitting right in front of us, challenging everything we think we understand. The Longyou Caves. The underground enigma. Beneath the unassuming hills of China's Zhejiang province lies a mystery that first came to light in 1992, not through academic excavation or satellite technology, but because a local villager became curious about an old legend. The people of Longyou had long spoken of mysterious ponds whose waters never ran dry, even during the harshest droughts. One day, a villager decided to drain one of these ponds to see what lay beneath. What he discovered defied explanation. A massive artificial cave hand-carved into solid siltstone, extending far beneath the surface. But this wasn't just a simple excavation. It was the entrance to what would eventually be revealed as 24 separate caverns, each averaging 1,000 square meters in size, with ceilings reaching up to 30 meters high. The scale alone is staggering. Archaeologists estimate that creating these caves would have required removing nearly 1 million cubic meters of rock, all without leaving behind any evidence of where this massive amount of material was deposited. But the precision is what truly challenges understanding. The walls and ceilings aren't rough-hewn or irregular. They're covered in uniform parallel chisel marks, forming a consistent fish scale pattern across almost every surface. These marks aren't random or haphazard. They follow a deliberate design, evenly spaced, precisely executed, covering tens of thousands of square meters of stone surface. And then there are the unsettling questions of logistics. How did the creators work in perfect darkness so far underground? How did they achieve such consistency in their carving across such vast spaces? How did they ventilate these enormous chambers without modern equipment? And perhaps, most perplexingly, why is there no historical record of their creation? The caves contain no inscriptions, no paintings, no artifacts, no burials, nothing to indicate their purpose or creators. Chinese historical records, normally meticulous about large-scale construction projects, contain no mention of this massive underground complex. It's as if someone wanted them to remain secret, or as if the civilization that created them vanished before recording their achievement. Engineering analysis has revealed another layer to the mystery. The pillars and walls are precisely positioned to ensure structural integrity, preventing collapse despite the enormous weight of stone above. The caves connect through narrow passages at exact intervals, suggesting a comprehensive master plan rather than random excavation. Some researchers have noted that the caves maintain a constant temperature year-round, regardless of surface conditions. Others have documented unusual acoustic properties. Sounds behave differently within these spaces than they would in natural caverns or typical man-made structures. Conservative dating places their creation at least 2,000 years ago, but some researchers suggest they could be significantly older. The uniform weathering patterns and lack of distinct cultural markers make precise dating extremely difficult. What kind of civilization undertakes a project of this magnitude without leaving any trace of their identity? What purpose could justify such an enormous investment of time and labor? Some propose they were underground palaces, others suggest storage facilities or ritual spaces. But all these explanations feel inadequate when confronted with the sheer scale and precision of what exists beneath Longyou. The cave's existence challenges fundamental assumptions about ancient capabilities. The level of planning required to ensure structural stability while removing such vast quantities of stone implies sophisticated understanding of engineering principles. The consistency of execution suggests organized labor on a massive scale, working to specific, predetermined standards. Perhaps most telling is how the modern world has responded to their discovery. Despite representing one of the largest underground structures created by ancient hands, the Longyou Caves remain relatively unknown outside specialist circles. They don't feature prominently in archaeological textbooks. They rarely appear in documentaries about ancient achievements. It's as if we collectively don't know how to categorize or explain them, so we've chosen to politely ignore their implications. Because those implications are profound, they suggest capabilities, organizational systems, and technical knowledge that don't align with our understanding of ancient China or human development more broadly. As you walk through these vast underground chambers today, running your fingers across the precisely chiseled patterns that extend far beyond what lamplight would have illuminated for ancient workers, you can't help but wonder, what else have we missed? What other achievements lie buried, not because they've been deliberately hidden, but because they don't fit our preconceptions about what should be possible? The Longyou Caves aren't just physical spaces carved from stone, they're voids in our understanding, chambers of questions that continue to echo without answers. The stone spheres of Bosnia, hidden in plain sight. In the forested hills surrounding the Bosnian town of Zabadovici, something strange has been hiding in plain sight for centuries, something that challenges conventional geology and perhaps history itself. Local residents had long noticed unusually spherical stones protruding from the earth, but it wasn't until 2016 that archaeological investigation revealed the true extent of what lay buried in these quiet woods. What researchers discovered were dozens of nearly perfect stone spheres, some measuring over 2 meters in diameter and weighing more than 30 tons. Unlike the famous stone spheres of Costa Rica, these weren't clearly crafted by human hands. They appeared to be naturally formed, yet their geometric perfection defied simple geological explanation. Mainstream geologists propose they were the result of a process called concretion, where mineral cement binds particles together around a core. But several factors make this explanation problematic when applied to the Bosnian spheres. First is their remarkable symmetry. Many are nearly perfect spheres, with deviations of less than a few centimeters across their entire surface. Natural concretions typically show much greater irregularity. Second is their composition. Analysis has revealed that some spheres contain materials not found in the surrounding soil and rock, raising questions about their formation. Third is their unusual distribution. They appear in clusters and lines rather than random scattering, suggesting possible deliberate arrangement. Dr. Semir Osmanagic, who first brought international attention to the spheres, has proposed a more controversial theory that they represent artifacts from an ancient civilization, potentially dating back over 1,500 years. His team has documented unusual electromagnetic readings around several of the largest spheres, though these findings remain disputed by conventional science. What makes these stones particularly intriguing is their similarity to spheres found in other parts of the world, from Costa Rica to New Zealand, from Mexico to Kazakhstan. In each location, nearly perfect stone spheres emerge from the landscape without clear explanation for their creation or purpose. Could these represent a global phenomenon, either geological or cultural, that we've failed to recognize, or is their similarity merely coincidental, a product of our human tendency to find patterns even where none exist? The forest surrounding these spheres has grown over them for centuries, roots embracing stone, seasons, cycling while they remain unchanged. Local folklore speaks of healing properties, of strange dreams experienced by those who sleep near them, of unusual behavior in electronic equipment brought into their vicinity. What if these aren't merely curious geological formations? What if they're remnants of something we've forgotten how to see or understand? The perfect sphere is mathematically significant. It represents the most efficient form in nature, the shape that contains the maximum volume with minimum surface area. It's a form that appears throughout the cosmos, from planets to water droplets. Perhaps that's why spheres feature so prominently in ancient architecture and symbolism across disparate cultures. They represent something fundamental about reality itself, a mathematical truth encoded in physical form. As you stand beside one of these massive spheres, partially embedded in the forest floor, you can't help but wonder what else might be hiding in plain sight, not buried deep underground or submerged beneath oceans, but simply waiting for us to see it with fresh eyes, without the limitations of our existing categories and explanations. The mystery of the Bosnian stone spheres isn't just about determining whether they're natural or artificial, it's about recognizing that this binary distinction might itself be limiting our understanding. Perhaps the most profound mysteries exist precisely at the intersection between what nature creates and what intelligent beings shape, a collaboration across time that we're only beginning to recognize. The Lost Labyrinth of Egypt. In the ancient world, one structure was described with such awe that it surpassed even the pyramids in its reputation for engineering marvel. Ancient historians like Herodotus and Strabo wrote of it with reverence, a massive complex containing 3,000 rooms connected by twisting passages, half built above ground, half extending below the surface. They called it the Labyrinth of Egypt, and for centuries, modern archaeologists dismissed it as mere legend. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described it as beyond my power to describe, and claimed he had found it greater than words could tell. He stated definitively that it surpassed even the pyramids in scale and complexity. Strabo, writing 4 centuries later, corroborated its existence, describing elaborate stone ceilings and passageways that twisted and turned through darkness, creating a bewildering maze. According to these accounts, the labyrinth stood near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis in the Fayum oasis, beside Lake Moraeus. It supposedly contained the tombs of the kings who built it and sacred crocodiles within its lower levels. The descriptions suggest a structure of unprecedented complexity, with different courts leading to different houses, each court surrounded by columns of white stone perfectly joined. For centuries, the labyrinth remained lost, assumed by many to be mythical, an exaggeration by ancient writers impressed by more modest structures. But in 2008, a team of Belgian and Egyptian archaeologists conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys near the pyramid of Amenemhat III at Hawara, in precisely the location where ancient sources placed the legendary labyrinth. What they discovered stunned the archaeological community. Evidence of an enormous structure extending over 300 meters on each side, buried beneath the surface. The scans revealed wall lines, chambers, and corridors in a complex pattern that matched the ancient descriptions with uncanny accuracy. But here's where the mystery deepens into something more troubling. Despite this remarkable discovery, no major excavation has been undertaken. No funds have been allocated to uncover what might be one of the most significant archaeological sites in Egypt. The research has been quietly filed away, occasionally referenced in academic papers, but not pursued with the vigor one might expect for such a potentially revolutionary find. Some researchers suggest the site has been deliberately avoided because it contradicts established chronologies of ancient Egyptian architectural capabilities. Others point to practical concerns. The water table in the area has risen significantly since ancient times, potentially damaging whatever remains below. Still others note the political and economic complexities of Egyptian archaeology, where limited resources must be allocated among countless worthy sites. Whatever the reason, the labyrinth remains buried, its secrets intact beneath the desert sand. If the ancient accounts are accurate, it represents an architectural achievement that would rival or exceed the pyramids themselves, a structure so complex that it inspired the legendary Cretan labyrinth in Greek mythology. What knowledge might be contained within its walls? What engineering techniques might it reveal about ancient Egyptian capabilities? What artifacts might remain preserved in chambers untouched for millennia? Perhaps most importantly, why has such a potentially significant discovery generated so little attention from the archaeological establishment? Is it simply a matter of practical limitations, or does the labyrinth represent something that doesn't fit neatly into our established narrative of ancient Egyptian civilization? As you consider this buried wonder, remember that our knowledge of the past is always incomplete, always subject to revision. The most significant discoveries often aren't new findings, but new perspectives on what's been in front of us all along, recorded in ancient texts, buried beneath familiar landscapes, waiting for someone to take seriously what earlier generations dismissed as exaggeration or myth. The labyrinth reminds us that sometimes the most profound mysteries aren't hidden in remote jungles or deep underwater trenches. Sometimes they're buried beneath sites we've studied for centuries, mentioned in texts we've translated and retranslated, hiding in plain sight because we weren't ready to see what they truly represented. The Serpent Mound, the cosmic messenger. In the gently rolling hills of southern Ohio lies a monument so subtle yet profound that it can only be fully appreciated from above. A massive serpent effigy stretching over 1,300 feet, its sinuous body winding across the landscape with its mouth open wide, appearing to consume an oval shape, often interpreted as an egg or the sun. This is the Great Serpent Mound, the largest serpent effigy in the world, and perhaps one of the most enigmatic ancient structures in North America. Unlike many mysterious sites we've explored, its basic form is unmistakable, clearly shaped by human hands into the recognizable form of a snake. But the questions surrounding its age, purpose, and creators transform this earthwork into something far more puzzling than its simple appearance suggests. The mound contains no burials, no artifacts, nothing that allows for easy dating or cultural attribution. For decades, archaeologists assumed it was created by the Adena culture around 800 BCE, but more recent carbon dating has suggested multiple construction periods, with some evidence pointing to the Fort Ancient culture around 1000 CE. Still more controversial research proposes much earlier origins, potentially dating back nearly 5,000 years. This uncertainty about its basic chronology reflects a deeper mystery. The serpent doesn't clearly align with any single cultural tradition known in pre-Columbian North America. It stands alone, distinctive, without obvious counterparts or precedents. What transforms this earthwork from curious to truly mysterious is its apparent astronomical alignments. The serpent's coils and key features align precisely with solar and lunar events. The head aligns with the summer solstice sunset, while various curves and undulations in the body correspond to other significant celestial positions throughout the year. These aren't approximate or coincidental alignments. They're precise, deliberate, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of astronomical cycles. The serpent's form itself may represent constellations, with some researchers suggesting it depicts the constellation Draco, which contained the pole star during earlier epochs. Perhaps most intriguing is the mound's location. It's built on the edge of a meteorite impact crater, dating back nearly 300 million years. Did the creators recognize this unusual geological formation and deliberately choose it for their cosmic serpent? Did they perceive some connection between the serpent form, the heavens, and this place where something literally fell from the sky in the distant past? Native American traditions across North America feature serpent symbolism connected to both the underworld and the cosmos. Serpents in these traditions often represent transformation, renewal, and the connection between worlds. The placement of a cosmic serpent on the rim of an impact crater may have represented a profound symbolic connection between Earth and sky. But here's where conventional archaeology struggles. The sophistication of the astronomical knowledge encoded in the Serpent Mound implies scientific understanding that supposedly didn't exist in pre-contact North America. The precision of the alignments suggests careful observation over generations, systematic record-keeping, and mathematical knowledge that goes well beyond what most archaeologists attribute to these cultures. Some researchers have noted similarities between the Serpent Mound and serpent symbolism in other ancient cultures worldwide, from the feathered serpent of Mesoamerica to the Nagas of India to the cosmic serpents of Aboriginal Australia. These parallels raise uncomfortable questions about possible connections between supposedly isolated ancient cultures. As you stand on the observation tower today, looking down at this serpentine form embracing the landscape, you're witnessing something that bridges worlds between earth and sky, between human construction and natural topography, between precise astronomy and spiritual symbolism. The Serpent Mound doesn't shout its mysteries. It doesn't feature massive stones or intricate carvings. Its power lies in its subtlety, in the way it connects landscape to skyscape, and how it encodes celestial knowledge in earthly form. It's a form of communication across time, a message about cycles and connections that we're still learning to decipher. What kind of society dedicates such enormous effort to creating a structure that can only be fully appreciated from a perspective they couldn't physically achieve? What were they trying to communicate, and to whom? The answers may lie, not in what we dig up from within the mound, but in how we understand its relationship to the wider cosmos. It so clearly references the Nazca Lines, messages to the sky. Stretching across approximately 500 square kilometers of arid plateau in southern Peru are markings so large they remained undiscovered until the age of flight. Enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert floor, depicting animals, plants, geometric patterns, and humanoid figures, some extending more than 370 meters in length. These are the Nazca Lines, created between 500 BCE and 500 CE by people who never saw them from above, who could never appreciate the precision and scale of what they were creating. And this fundamental paradox forms the core of their mystery. Why would an ancient culture devote such enormous effort to creating images that they themselves could never fully view? The conventional archaeological explanation attributes the lines to the Nazca culture and suggests they were created for religious purposes, perhaps connected to water sources or celestial deities. The dry, windless conditions of the Nazca Plateau have preserved these shallow trenches for nearly 2 millennia, simply by removing the reddish-brown surface stones to reveal the lighter-colored earth beneath. The ancient creators made marks that would outlast most stone monuments elsewhere. But the how is perhaps less mysterious than the why. The technical aspects, using simple surveying techniques to maintain proportions while scaling up designs, are relatively straightforward. What continues to puzzle researchers is the purpose behind such a massive undertaking that couldn't be fully appreciated by its creators. Some of the figures demonstrate remarkable astronomical alignments. The spider geoglyph, for instance, appears to represent the constellation Orion. Others align with seasonal solstices and equinoxes. The precision of these alignments suggests sophisticated astronomical knowledge, carefully transferred from sky observation to ground representation. But there's something more puzzling about the Nazca Lines that goes beyond their size or even their astronomical connections. Many of the lines form perfect straight paths extending for kilometers across uneven terrain. From ground level, creating such perfectly straight lines across vast distances represents a significant surveying challenge. Yet the Nazca achieved this without modern instruments. Some researchers have documented unusual electromagnetic properties along certain lines, though these findings remain controversial. Others have noted that many lines connect to ancient water sources, suggesting they may have formed a ritual map related to water worship in this arid region. The most famous explanation, proposed by Erich von Däniken in the 1960s, suggested the lines were landing strips for extraterrestrial visitors. While this theory has been thoroughly rejected by mainstream archaeology, it highlights a legitimate question: why create markings seemingly meant to be viewed from above in a culture without the technology for flight? Perhaps the most compelling explanation comes from understanding the Nazca worldview. In many Indian cultures, mountains were considered deities who controlled weather and water. The lines may have been created as a form of communication with these mountain gods, who could see the desert floor from their elevated positions. They weren't meant for human eyes at all, but for divine ones. This interpretation aligns with what we know about Nazca religious practices, which included mountain worship and rituals connected to water sources. The lines may have functioned as ritual pathways, with people walking these routes as part of ceremonies seeking divine favor, particularly for water in this arid landscape. What makes the Nazca Lines particularly valuable for understanding ancient cultures is their continued existence despite their vulnerability. Unlike massive stone constructions, these shallow trenches could have been easily erased by human activity or environmental changes. Their survival suggests the region's inhabitants, even after the Nazca culture faded, continued to respect and protect these markings. As you fly over the Nazca Plateau today, witnessing these enormous figures emerge from the desert floor, you're seeing exactly what the creators could not, the full impact of their work from the perspective it was apparently designed to be viewed. You're completing a communication that began nearly 2,000 years ago, a message sent across time that required technologies its creators didn't possess to be fully received. The mystery of the Nazca Lines isn't simply about how they were made or even why. It's about the profound human impulse to communicate beyond immediate limitations, to create something meant for eyes other than one's own, whether divine or future. It's about faith and perspective beyond what was immediately accessible, a reaching towards something greater than present circumstance. In this sense, the Nazca Lines represent something deeply human, the desire to be seen and understood across boundaries of time, space, and physical limitation, a message sent without knowing if or when it would be fully received. The Baghdad Battery, ancient electricity. In 1938, while excavating near Baghdad, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig discovered something that would challenge conventional understanding of ancient technological capabilities: a 13-centimeter clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod, elements that appeared suspiciously similar to a modern electrical battery. Dating to approximately 250 BCE during the Parthian period, this unassuming artifact and several similar objects have sparked decades of controversy. When replicated with modern materials and filled with an acidic liquid like grape juice or vinegar, these devices produce approximately 2 volts of electricity, enough to power small instruments or electroplate metal objects. The implications are profound. If these were indeed batteries, they would predate Alessandro Volta's invention of the first true battery by more than 2,000 years. This would fundamentally alter our understanding of ancient technological capabilities and raise questions about what other advanced knowledge might have been lost to history. Conventional archaeology has proposed alternative explanations. Perhaps these were containers for storing sacred scrolls or vessels for particular religious rituals. But these explanations fail to account for the specific arrangement of metals that so perfectly mimics basic electrical components. When modern researchers constructed replicas, they functioned as electrical cells without any modifications to the original design. This suggests intentionality. These weren't accidental arrangements of materials that coincidentally could produce electricity. They were deliberately constructed in a way that generates an electrical current when filled with the right solution. What makes this discovery particularly perplexing is the absence of any written records describing their use or construction. No texts from Mesopotamia mention electricity or applications that would require it. No illustrations depict these devices in use. They stand alone, functional but unexplained, a technology without context. If these were batteries, what were they used for? Some researchers propose they may have powered small lights for religious ceremonies, creating seemingly magical effects. Others suggest they could have been used for electroplating, applying thin layers of precious metals to objects through electrolysis, a technique not officially discovered until the 19th century. Interestingly, some ancient Parthian and Sasanian artifacts show evidence of electroplating, with gold layers so thin they couldn't have been applied using conventional ancient techniques. Could these batteries explain this technological anomaly? Perhaps most puzzling is why this technology didn't spread more widely or develop further. If ancient peoples had discovered electricity, why didn't this knowledge transform their civilization as it did ours? Why doesn't the historical record show a progression of increasingly sophisticated electrical devices? One possibility is that the knowledge was deliberately restricted, perhaps limited to a priestly class who used it to create miraculous effects that reinforced their spiritual authority. Another is that the technology served very specific, limited purposes that didn't immediately suggest broader applications. It's also possible that political instability and warfare in the region disrupted the transmission of this knowledge. The period when these batteries appear coincides with significant conflicts between Parthian, Roman, and Sasanian forces. Perhaps the knowledge was lost during these turbulent times, surviving only in these few artifacts without the contextual understanding that would have explained their purpose. As you hold a replica of the Baghdad Battery today, feeling the slight tingle of electricity it produces with nothing more than copper, iron, and grape juice, you're experiencing something that challenges fundamental assumptions about ancient technological knowledge. You're touching a device that shouldn't exist according to conventional historical narratives, yet undeniably works exactly as a simple battery should. The Baghdad Battery reminds us that the line between possible and impossible in history isn't fixed. It's constantly redrawn as new evidence emerges, as we develop new methods of analysis, and as we become willing to question established narratives about human technological development. Perhaps the most important question isn't whether these were truly batteries in the modern sense, but why we find it so difficult to accept that ancient civilizations might have discovered principles and developed technologies that don't fit our neat linear narrative of human progress. The underwater ruins of Yonaguni, nature or nurture. Off the coast of Japan's Yonaguni Island lies a geological formation that has divided the scientific community since its discovery. In 1987, a massive underwater structure with flat terraces, straight edges, sharp corners, and what appear to be ramps and stairs, all seemingly arranged in a complex architectural pattern. The formation sits in relatively shallow water, between 5 and 40 meters deep, making it accessible to recreational divers. At first glance, it resembles the ruins of a stepped pyramid or temple complex, with features that appear distinctly artificial, right angles, parallel surfaces, and geometric precision unusual in natural formations. Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, has studied the formation for decades and believes it represents the remains of a human-made structure, potentially dating back to when the area was above sea level during the last ice age, approximately 10,000 years ago. If true, this would make it one of the oldest complex structures on Earth, challenging conventional timelines of human civilization. Kimura points to several features that suggest human intervention: apparent post holes cut into the rock, what looks like a carved face in one section, drainage channels, and stone tools found in the vicinity. He argues that while the underlying structure may be natural, it shows clear signs of modification and enhancement by human hands. Mainstream geology, however, offers a different interpretation. Many scientists argue that the formations are entirely natural, the result of specific sedimentary processes and tectonic activity in the region. They point to the fact that the Yonaguni Monument consists of sandstone layers that naturally break along straight lines, creating the appearance of artificial construction. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University who has studied many controversial archaeological sites, concluded after personal examination that the formation is primarily natural, though he acknowledges some areas may show signs of human modification. What makes Yonaguni particularly challenging to classify is that it exists in a gray area between clearly natural and obviously artificial. Unlike submerged ruins with identifiable columns, walls, or artifacts, Yonaguni presents a more ambiguous case: a structure that could represent natural processes, mimicking architectural forms, or ancient architecture working with natural formations. The age of the site compounds the mystery. If it was indeed modified by humans when it was above sea level, this would have occurred at least 10,000 years ago, long before conventional archaeology recognizes complex stone architecture in the region. This timing aligns with controversial theories about advanced civilizations existing before the end of the last ice age, civilizations potentially lost to rising sea levels as glaciers melted. Some researchers have noted potential astronomical alignments in the monument's orientation, suggesting it may have served as a kind of calendar or observatory if it was indeed modified by human hands. Others point to similarities between certain features at Yonaguni and known ancient sites in Japan and throughout the Pacific region. Perhaps most intriguing is the monument's location in what some researchers call the Pacific Ring of Monuments, a series of megalithic sites spanning from Easter Island to Indonesia to Japan, many sharing similar construction techniques despite being separated by vast oceanic distances. As you swim around these massive step formations today, running your hand along surfaces that could be either naturally fractured rock or deliberately carved stone, you're confronting one of archaeology's most fundamental challenges. The line between natural and artificial isn't always clear, especially when dealing with extremely ancient sites that may represent a blend of both. The Yonaguni Monument reminds us that humans have always worked with natural formations rather than against them. Many ancient sites incorporate natural features into their design, making the distinction between found and made less meaningful than our modern perspective might suggest. Whether entirely natural, completely artificial, or something in between, Yonaguni represents something profound, either nature's remarkable ability to create forms that appear designed, or humanity's ancient relationship with the natural world, recognizing and enhancing existing patterns rather than imposing entirely new ones. Perhaps the most important lesson from Yonaguni is epistemological. How do we know what we know about the past? What standards of evidence do we apply? And how do these standards shift when confronted with anomalies that don't fit existing paradigms? The underwater monument challenges not just specific historical narratives, but the very process by which we construct and maintain those narratives. The Fortress of Sacsayhuaman, impossible stonework. Overlooking the ancient Inca capital of Cusco, in Peru, stands a structure so remarkable in its construction that Spanish conquistadors believed it must have been built by demons. Local legends suggested it was created by giants from an earlier age. Modern engineers simply scratched their heads in confusion. This is Sacsayhuaman, a massive stone complex featuring walls built from limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons each, fitted together with such precision that not even a piece of paper can be inserted between them, despite their complex, irregular shapes that interlock like a three-dimensional puzzle. The conventional historical narrative attributes Sacsayhuaman to the Inca Empire, constructed around the 15th century CE, but even this basic attribution raises profound questions. How did a civilization without wheeled vehicles, iron tools, or draft animals cut, transport, and place stones of such enormous size with such incredible precision? Some of the largest blocks originated from quarries located over 35 kilometers away and would have required transportation across rivers and up steep mountain slopes. Modern engineering estimates suggest that moving just one of the largest stones would require the coordinated effort of at least 2,500 men using rope and wooden rollers. But the true mystery lies not in the size of the stones, but in the precision of their fitting. The blocks aren't simple rectangles that could be measured and cut to standard dimensions. They're complex polygons with multiple faces, each custom shaped to interlock perfectly with its neighbors, creating walls that have withstood devastating earthquakes, while colonial Spanish buildings constructed nearby collapsed. Conventional explanations suggest the Inca used hammerstones to gradually shape these massive blocks, meticulously testing the fit between adjacent stones and making adjustments until they matched perfectly. But this explanation struggles to account for the level of precision achieved, tolerances that would challenge modern stone-cutting technology with power tools and measuring instruments. Some of the joints between stones are so precise and complex that they appear to have been molded rather than cut. Certain sections show evidence of stones being fitted into curved recesses in adjacent blocks, a technique that would be extraordinarily difficult to achieve through hammering and grinding alone. Even more puzzling are the signs of advanced stoneworking techniques, perfectly drilled holes, complex internal cuts, and evidence of surface treatments that have allowed these structures to maintain their integrity for centuries, despite Peru's seismic activity. Researchers like Brian Forster have documented evidence suggesting some stones show signs of having been softened or altered through an unknown process before being placed. The surfaces sometimes display a vitrified or glazed appearance inconsistent with mechanical cutting and grinding. The layout of Sacsayhuaman adds another layer of mystery. The complex features precise astronomical alignments, sophisticated water management systems, and acoustic properties that suggest purposes beyond simple fortification. Sound behaves unusually within certain chambers, with some areas amplifying voices, while others create unusual echoing effects. Perhaps most telling is how the Spanish chroniclers describe Sacsayhuaman. When they asked the local Inca people who built it, they were told that these structures predated the Inca themselves, that they were the work of an earlier people with different capabilities. The Inca claimed they had added to and modified these ancient structures, but had not originally built them. This pattern repeats throughout the Andes. The most precisely constructed stone works, featuring the largest and most perfectly fitted blocks, are attributed by indigenous traditions to more ancient cultures that predated the Inca. The Inca themselves apparently distinguished between their own construction techniques and what they called the work of the ancient ones. As you stand before these massive walls today, running your hand along joints so perfect, they feel almost seamless, despite separating stones weighing many tons each. You're confronting evidence that challenges conventional explanations, whether built by the Inca, using techniques we don't fully understand, or representing the work of an earlier civilization, with capabilities we failed to recognize. Sacsayhuaman stands as a testament to achievement that exceeds our current understanding of what should have been possible in pre-industrial times. The fortress reminds us that the capabilities of ancient peoples weren't limited by the technologies we've attributed to them in our historical narratives. They achieved results that would challenge us even today, using methods that may have been lost rather than never discovered. The Piri Reis Map, Impossible Knowledge. In 1929, a group of historians working at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul made a discovery that would challenge conventional understanding of historical geography. A fragmentary map drawn on gazelle skin, signed by Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis, and dated to 1513 CE. What made this map extraordinary wasn't simply its age, but its content. It depicted the eastern coast of South America, the northern coast of Antarctica, and the western coast of Africa with remarkable accuracy, including geographical features that European explorers supposedly hadn't yet discovered when the map was created. Piri Reis himself noted that his map was compiled from about 20 earlier source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great and earlier, others attributed to Portuguese explorers. He specifically mentioned using the maps of the Arabs and the Indians in a map drawn by Columbus. The map's accuracy for its time is impressive but not entirely unprecedented. What has generated true controversy are specific features that seemingly shouldn't have been known in 1513, particularly the apparent depiction of Antarctica's coastline without ice, showing geographic features that today lie buried beneath glaciers thousands of meters thick. In the 1960s, Professor Charles Hapgood argued that the map showed Antarctica as it would have appeared before it was covered by ice, a condition that existed more than 6,000 years ago, according to conventional geology. If true, this would suggest Piri Reis had access to source maps created by an advanced maritime civilization that existed and was mapping the world thousands of years before conventional history acknowledges. This interpretation has been disputed by mainstream cartographers, who suggest the southern landmass on the map represents a distorted view of South America's east coast rather than Antarctica. They point to the map's own annotations, which identify the region as an extension of South American territory. However, certain features remain difficult to explain. The map shows mountain ranges and locations where modern surveys have confirmed mountains exist beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. It depicts rivers and coastlines with proportions that match modern satellite measurements with surprising accuracy for a 16th century document. Perhaps most puzzling is the map's apparent use of sophisticated mathematical projections. Analysis suggests it may have been drawn using a projection centered on Egypt, with remarkable accuracy in relative distances, despite the lack of precise longitudinal measurement capabilities in the 16th century. Conventional explanations suggest these accuracies are coincidental or reflect lucky guesswork based on limited exploration reports. But this interpretation struggles to account for the specific combination of accurate features that wouldn't be confirmed by direct observation until centuries later. Piri Reis himself offers a clue, when he notes that some of his source maps dated from the time when Alexander, the Two-Horned, had conquered the inhabited world, suggesting he had access to cartographic knowledge from the Hellenistic period that has otherwise been lost to modern scholarship. This raises a profound question. What if our linear narrative of geographical discovery is fundamentally flawed? What if earlier civilizations possessed more advanced maritime and cartographic capabilities than we've acknowledged, and this knowledge was preserved in maps that were copied and recopied across cultures and centuries? The historical record contains tantalizing hints of such possibilities. Ancient Greek and Egyptian texts mention extensive maritime explorations. Medieval Arabic geographers compiled remarkably accurate knowledge of distant lands. Chinese Admiral Zheng He. His fleet mapped vast regions of the Indian Ocean and potentially beyond in the early 15th century. As you examine a reproduction of the Piri Reis map today, tracing coastlines that align with modern satellite imagery, despite being drawn 5 centuries ago, you're confronting a document that doesn't fit neatly into conventional historical narratives. It suggests a world where geographical knowledge wasn't accumulated in a straight line from ignorance to understanding, but perhaps followed a more complex pattern of discovery, loss, and rediscovery across millennia. The map reminds us that knowledge doesn't always progress forward. Sometimes it moves sideways, preserved in unexpected places. Sometimes it's lost entirely, leaving only fragments that hint at what was once understood. And sometimes, as with this gazelle skin document signed by an Ottoman admiral, it emerges centuries later to challenge our assumptions about what was known, when it was known, and by whom. Final thoughts. The pattern in the silence. As our journey through these ancient enigmas comes to a close, a pattern emerges from the collective silence surrounding these sites, a pattern that challenges not just specific historical narratives, but our entire approach to understanding the human past. From the magnetic anomalies of Russia's Ural Mountains to the perfect acoustic chambers of Malta's hypogeum, from the impossible precision of Peru's stone walls to the massive monoliths of Japan, we've encountered sites that shouldn't exist according to conventional understanding of ancient capabilities. Yet they do exist, physical and measurable, challenging us to expand our conception of what our ancestors knew and could achieve. What if these aren't isolated anomalies, but fragments of a more complex human story? What if the conventional timeline of human technological development, from simple to complex in a relatively straight line, fundamentally misrepresents our past? What if advanced knowledge has emerged and been lost repeatedly throughout human history, creating a pattern more cyclical than linear? These questions aren't merely academic. They touch on something profound about our identity as a species and our relationship with our own past. The conventional narrative of steady progress from primitive to advanced is comforting. It places us at the pinnacle of human achievement, looking back at less capable ancestors. But what if that narrative is wrong? What if previous civilizations achieved knowledge and capabilities in specific domains that we're only now rediscovering? What if catastrophic events, whether natural disasters, climate changes, or human conflicts, have repeatedly reset human progress, leaving only the most durable monuments as evidence of what came before? Perhaps the most telling aspect of these mysteries is institutional archaeology's general reluctance to engage deeply with them. Sites that don't fit established narratives often receive minimal funding, limited excavation, and academic dismissal. It's as if acknowledging their significance would require rewriting textbooks and reconsidering established careers built on current paradigms. But true science doesn't fear evidence that challenges existing theories. It embraces such challenges as opportunities for growth and deeper understanding. The most significant scientific advances throughout history have come precisely when anomalous evidence forced reconsideration of established models. As you drift toward sleep tonight, I invite you to consider that our understanding of human history remains profoundly incomplete. The stone walls in Peru that no modern mason can replicate, the acoustic chambers in Malta that no modern engineer can explain, the massive stones in Japan that no conventional technology could move, these aren't merely curiosities. They're invitations to a more humble relationship with our past. Perhaps our ancestors weren't simply less advanced versions of ourselves, gradually climbing toward our current capabilities. Perhaps they were different versions of human potential, developing knowledge and techniques along paths we haven't fully explored or understood. The next time you encounter a conventional historical timeline that neatly categorizes human achievement into convenient epochs, remember the massive monolith sitting inexplicably on its Japanese hillside. Remember the acoustic perfection of India's cave chambers. Remember the mathematical precision of Costa Rica's stone spheres. These silent witnesses tell a different story, one of sophisticated knowledge emerging far earlier than conventionally acknowledged, of capabilities that don't fit neatly into our progressive model of development, of connections between distant cultures that challenge our understanding of ancient isolation. The mystery isn't just in the stones, it's in our collective reluctance to see them for what they truly represent, chapters from a much longer, much more complex human story than we've been willing to acknowledge. A story that continues to wait patiently in stone for those curious enough to truly see what stands before them. Thank you for joining me on this journey through humanity's enigmatic past. If you've enjoyed exploring these mysteries, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What ancient mystery fascinates you most? What sites would you like to explore in future episodes? Your curiosity feeds mine, and together, perhaps we'll uncover truths that have waited millennia to be rediscovered. Until next time, sleep well, dream deeply, and remember, the most profound mysteries aren't those hidden from sight, but those hiding in plain view, waiting for us to see them with fresh eyes and open minds.